Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show, Week 13 Instant Recap Edition. I am your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, and it's a great day to break down all of the action from Sunday and a little bit of Black Friday thrown in there as well. But I cannot accomplish this alone, and thus I am joined by the one, the only. He's got the hair of a freaking god, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. What's up, Dwain?
What's up, Ian? Just talking about sweating a few games here. You and I, we have some teams together where, thought it was pretty much a done game. And the other team got some trash points there from Lamar Jackson. Look, are any points from Lamar Jackson really trash points? I don't even think I get to say that. Like, the guy scores 25 fantasy points every single week, so I shouldn't be bitching. But the game got a lot closer than what we wanted it. We are big Tyler Bass fans. Ian's not he's not a kicker fan very often, guys, but tonight, Mr. Hartitz, if you hear him yell, it's probably because Tyler Bass just nailed a 50-yarder.
One man's garbage time points, or another man's just garbage that he gets really mad about. But I don't know, Dwain, I've actually this year come to appreciate kickers more just out of pure schadenfreude hate towards Justin Tucker. So that's kind of been fun. I'm sure we'll get to that later. But yeah, man, hopefully other people out there coming out on the right end of these ever crucial Week 13 matchups as we get ahead to those fantasy playoffs. But in order to get us ready for Week 14 and beyond, we do need to digest everything that just went down. So Dwain, on the Friday edition of the Fantasy Life Show, we broke down all the Thanksgiving games. If you guys want to catch up on those usage tidbits, feel free to check out the first 10 or so minutes of that episode. However, we did not go over the Chiefs taking down the Raiders 19-17 on Black Friday. Another, I think we can say wimpy victory, but a win is a win is a win for the now 11-1 Chiefs. So kudos to the Raiders for keeping this one close. If they just were able to get a snap off at the very end and not lose a fumble, they maybe could have gotten that W, but instead they simply need to settle for the cover as 13.5-point dog. So under a 42 did cash as well. So another nice, just productive game from Patrick Mahomes. Dwain, wasn't that long ago that we weren't getting very many of those at all. 306 yards through the air and a touchdown. However, took those 5 sacks, and accordingly didn't exactly see the Chiefs marching up and down the field all afternoon long. Big change in terms of a usage standpoint, though, does come down this backfield. Not a lot of production to go around between either guy, but we did see the return of Isaiah Pacheco, Dwain.
Yeah, I mean, Pacheco only scored 5.9 PPR points, but he was almost in an even split with Kareem Hunt in his first game back, which is really encouraging. Hunt still had the slight lead, 40% snap share versus 33% for Pacheco, and that really just came down to some of the passing down work, which Hunt got over Pacheco. We saw Hunt with a 39% route participation, whereas Pacheco was at 20%. But rushing attempts, both guys had 47% of the backfield. So if it's an even split now, I would think that Pacheco eventually is pulling ahead. Of course, as soon as we think that, like, it doesn't ever happen. But to me, I think the big takeaway is the fact that it is encouraging that Pacheco nearly forced an even split in his first game back. And I would lean toward, him starting to take over more of the backfield. Will he ever get the full-time, like, bell cow role that we hoped for earlier in the season? Maybe not. Hunt might be enough at this point, and the injury to Pacheco and the way that they want to treat him could be enough to keep that from happening. But still, very encouraging that Pacheco was in a near split in that first game.
Kareem Hunt, 9th worst rushing yards over expected mark in the league. He does some good things right in short yardage, but I'm with you, Dwain. Hopefully, just being this close of a timeshare in first game back leads to bigger things for Pacheco here in Week 14 and beyond. Over with the pass catchers, we did have DeAndre Hopkins go for 90 yards on 9 targets, even drew 2 defensive pass interference penalties for a week-high 46 yards over there. Travis Kelce also caught 7 of 13 targets for 68 yards. Noah Gray had another solid enough game with 58 yards, and Xavier Worthy with 54. So, Dwain, again, we know we're getting with Travis Kelce. Maybe he's been dudding a bit more often this year, but you're still going to be hard-pressed to rank him any lower than, say, the tight end 3 during any given week. Hopkins has been the one where we've seen some good production, but not always seen that full-time role. And we were sitting here last week complaining about Justin Watson and freaking Juju Smith-Schuster taking routes from the artist known as Nuke. So, did we see a step in the positive direction in terms of just how often Hopkins was on the field last Friday?
Well, it was better than last week, but still just kind of in a holding pattern, between 60 and 70%. Last week, he dipped below the 60% mark, which we didn't like because he was actually behind Juju Smith-Schuster. So that flipped back in his favor, but not by a ton. I mean, he was 67% route participation versus 57% for Juju. So it is a rotation behind Travis Kelce. None of these guys are in full-time roles, and I don't think that we should treat them as anything other than, just part-time players until we see one of them firmly establish themselves for like a couple of weeks, which we're getting to the end of the season. Like, we're probably not going to see that. If you have to pick one, it's still Hopkins. Like, if you're having to start one player that's not named Travis Kelce in the receiving corps for the Chiefs, it still is DeAndre Hopkins. He had a 27% targets per route run. The targets per route run have actually been great. It's just not getting to play quite enough. Obviously, we know he does get some of the targets down in the end zone. That is a spot where Mahomes likes to go to him. So that gives him a little bit of a boost that helps offset some of the lack of playing time. But still, man, if Hopkins was out here, and who knows, maybe he's not healthy enough too, but if he was out here 85 and 90%, I think we would be loving what we're getting from DeAndre Hopkins, despite the fact that he is older. He's not the same version we used to see in this offense. It would be pretty good right now, more of a low end wide receiver, mid-range wide receiver 3.
Eye test, certainly has looked good for Hopkins. And that was even true last year as well. But yeah, can only do so much when you're not on the field as much as we would prefer. So Chiefs are facing the Chargers next week on Sunday Night Football. We'll be in Arrowhead, so get your popcorn ready for that one. Do not get your popcorn ready for the Raiders against the Buccaneers in Week 14, Dwayne. But hey, shout out to Aiden O'Connell, 340 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. Yeah, he took 3 sacks and lost a fumble as well. But he was making some big boy throws out there, man. 4 for 5 for 163 yards and 2 scores on passes thrown 20 yards downfield. And just want to give a shout out to the great Robert Mays, always doing great things, I believe, with the Athletic now. But Robert had a great tweet saying the oldest man game I've ever seen from a man under 30, and I generally enjoy it. I hope he hangs around the league for a decade. So that really is what you're getting with AOC. No, we're not necessarily expecting him to be repeating this, prolific passing performance in future weeks. But at a minimum, Dwayne, seeing him put up these types of numbers, very good news for the rest of season outlooks for Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, I mean, Aiden O'Connell, this is a career high for him at 340. His previous career high had been 299 last season against the Colts. The Colts were a bad, defense last year as well. Then before that, he had a 271. So, yeah, he's got a few games where he's been up here. He doesn't have that many true starts under his belt, still not even a full season's worth. So, yeah, I mean, maybe he does have something. The way we were kind of talking about it last week, probably, an even exchange for Gardner Minshew. Yeah. You're going to have your 225-yard games, but it is nice to know, to your point, that we do have this 300-plus yard ceiling. And, man, I think the biggest takeaway from this game, well, obviously, everything coming down to, as far as the Raiders go, 52% of the targets were between just 2 players. So we had it all going through 73% of the targets. Good. 52%. 73% of the targets went through Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. But we've been talking about that. They're really the 1A, 1B. The backfield was kind of a complete, not a mess. It was still Abdullah leading the way, Ian, but didn't have a big game, 7.3 PPR points. Sincere McCormick, because, Matthew Friedman made fun of his name, actually outscored Abdullah, 8.5 PPR points, 38% of the snaps, 48% of the attempts. We do have a situation, though, where we don't really know what's going to happen once Madison's healthy, once Zamir White is healthy. This was a situation where they were all out. But again, for me, it's man, dude, are the Chiefs, they're barely beating the Raiders and the Panthers.
I know.
This is and I get it. A win is a win. You still came through at the end. You get the win. I know Mahomes is going to put you in any game, but man, I'm kind of wondering, as soon as they face a good team in the playoffs, are they just going to get blown out?
Kind of reminds me of last year's Eagles, Dwayne. Tough to say that much smack because they're winning games, but we have not seen them look like they're firing all gears really all season long. I mean, if anything, the offense has, I think, started to step its game up here over the last, 4 to 6 weeks, and now the defense is the one dragging. So not ideal at all, but yeah, to your main point about Sincere McCormick and Abdullah, I do think Madison should probably be back next week. He was questionable going into this one with a week of limited practices under his belt. So for now, continue to mostly just trust Brock Bowers as maybe the planet Earth tight end 1 at this point. I'm sure we'll have some very fun offseason discussions about whether or not he warrants, maybe a first round ADP in 2025 drafts. But otherwise, man, yeah, just Jacoby Myers once again doing his thing, 97 yards on 11 targets. I mean, with Jacoby, Dwayne, is it time just to jam the dude inside the top 20 on a weekly basis? He's going to be there next week with 6 teams on bye, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably next week. I think he's still a wide receiver 3, but we've had him as a borderline wide receiver 2. The targets have definitely been there, man. And Jacoby, for whatever reason, we never want to get fully bought in. I think you and I are pretty fair to him, but overall, right, as an industry, it's nobody ever really wants to it's just kind of dip your toe in the water on Jacoby. Right. Nobody ever goes full all in. But the dude, man, we've talked about it so many times. Basically, if you go back to the game since they lost Devontae Adams, which was after week 3, I want to say now, I haven't added in this week, but he was sitting at a 26 or 27% target share in those games. And then he had a monster game here. So he's going to be higher than that. mean, look, if somebody has a target share of 25% or higher, they're probably a really good player. I don't care, even if some of it's like, on scheme and design kind of stuff. You design stuff for the players you want to get the ball to. So that's just a plus for him too. So yeah, I still say borderline wide receiver 2 on a full slate. I agree with you, probably inside the top 24 next week.
Last 4 games, 105 yards, 28, 121, and 97 with 11, 6, 15, and 11 targets. So no touchdowns in those games. That is, part of being a part of the Raiders offense. But yes, very, very, very good receiver. And if you want to start again using those targets and the fact that he is so good at playing football as your tiebreakers, I will not be besmirking you for that. All right, everyone, let's get into the actual Sunday action now, starting off with the Chargers taking down the Falcons 17-13, covering as 1-point phase with the under cashing at 47. So Justin Herbert didn't exactly put up the big-time numbers we were used to seeing. Still an efficient enough day passing, 147 through the air on 16 of 23 passing. Main problem was, man, he took 5 sacks against a Falcons defense that only had 10 coming into the season. So not, exactly what we were looking for, Dwain, particularly with the fact that, the Chargers only ran the ball 17 times total. If you take out the runs that Herbert had himself, we're talking about only 11 carries between Gus Edwards, Kamani Vidal, Darius Davis, and Hassan Haskins. So again, just an overall alarming low number of plays for the Chargers, so I wouldn't overly worry about it. But what did we see in those limited touches out of this new look Chargers backfield that unfortunately is going to be the status quo here for at least next month, with J.K. Dobbins landing on IR due to that knee injury?
Yeah, just a big, to your point, outlier game as far as the low volume, like just a really weird way that this game worked out, time of possession and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't read too much into it. But yeah, as far as the backfield went for this one, it was a committee, but it was Gus leading the committee. He was almost in the Dobbins role but not quite. Didn't have quite as much of the passing down work as what we were seeing for Dobbins. Gus only gave you 4.3 PPR points today, but he had 52% of the snaps, 43% of the rushing attempts, 43% route participation. So if we go back and we look at that Dobbins role, it was more like 60% snaps, 50 to 55% of the rushing attempts, and around 50% of the routes. So Gus and like a slightly smaller version of what we got from Dobbins, but just doesn't look as good. Gus just does not look as explosive. He's more of a, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of runner right now. Maybe we'll see him round into form and start to look a little bit better. Kamani Vidal was out there for 26% of the snaps, 29% of the rushing attempts, and 21% route participation. So he was the number 2 in the offense. Still, though, didn't get a lot of work. Only 2 fantasy points. So I want to have him stashed, everywhere that I can. But we can't be using Kamani Vidal right now. And then you got Hassan Haskins. Yes, Ian, in the basic, you're right. He has a role where he only gets this one kind of carry. And it's in a certain formation where half the time they put him as the up back. So he had -2 PPR points today on 13% of the snaps. So 3 guys involved, but really it's Gus, then Vidal, kind of spelling him, and then, Haskins, stealing that pesky touch here or there.
Haskins did indeed lose his only carry for a fumble. So maybe that will, again, encourage Harbaugh and company to give more work to Vidal down the stretch. Looked really nice out there, at least on that 16-yard carry, breaking some tackles and looking explosive. But yeah, do have a hard time believing that Roman and, especially Greg Roman, given all of his history with Gus Edwards, is going to be too inclined to completely turn
Vidal's the one that we would probably get really excited about. Like if Vidal had Gus Edwards' role, we would feel pretty good about it.
Yeah.
But it's like Gus Edwards, like we kind of need him to have like even more than this role to be excited about him. If we could get Vidal in this Edwards role, I think we'd feel pretty great about it, but it's hard to project that. Like we would have to wait and just basically see it happen.
Again, it needs to either be taken over, which I find a little bit unlikely, or more probably we're looking at Vidal more so as just a handcuff down the stretch. But that being said, Dwain, a good handcuff. Otherwise, in the passing game, Ladd McConkey, man, caught 9 of 12 targets for $117, almost entirely in the first half. But he had 78% of the team's receiving yardage. Unfortunately, though, he has that Julio gene, Dwain, where it seems like after every single catch he makes, he is trotting off into the sideline, banged up with one thing or another. So it's been the shoulder and the pass today. It was a knee issue that did wind up sidelining him. Last update I saw was that he was just questionable to return with the knee issue. So not guaranteed to be overly serious. I didn't think just watching the game that it was overly serious, but something to keep obviously an eye out, Dwayne, because again, if we are finally going to see this 50% target share for Lad, which, okay, isn't going to happen every week, but give us 30%, man. Then we can get behind this guy as a legit, weekly upside wide receiver too, because Lord knows he's been playing well enough to be there.
Yeah, I mean, and we've continued to upgrade him. He was already at that low end wide receiver 2 territory after this performance. It's like, and we had him higher than that this week due to the matchup. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to not have him as a mid-range wide receiver 2 or higher, assuming that he is healthy. That's the big key here. Is he going to be healthy? But you mentioned it, a 50% target share today, 69% air yard share, 4.68 yards per route run today. So yeah, great day for Ladd McConkey, 20.7 fantasy points. Looking more like a mid-range wide receiver 2 the rest of the way.
Trying to quickly see if there's any updates on the knee injury, but yeah, no further information as of right now. So hopefully A-okay, because again, guys, been a lot of fun to watch. 48-yard catch and run, guys. He really does do just about everything right out there on the football field. Otherwise, for the Chargers, yeah, as you can guess, not much production to go around. Just 12 scoreless yards for Quentin Johnson with another drop to the tally. And Will Dissly sadly graced us with a goose egg, even without Hayden Hurst in the picture for the rest of the season. So we'll be, again, Chargers at the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. Probably the sort of game that does force Herbert and company to air the ball out more. So please, injury gods, do not take away Ladd McConkey. We will want him for that one. Otherwise, Dwayne, looking at the Falcons, disappointing performance. And probably, I mean, I saw people like, Arif, who's a great Twitter follow and just a longtime Vikings fan, say it was pretty much the worst we've ever seen Kirk Cousins. And you know what? I'm not really inclined to disagree with the man. 4 interceptions, only the last one, which came on like a 4th and 12 at the end where you pretty much had to force it at that point, I think was excusable, man. We had a throw to the flat that was taken back in the distance that looked like he threw it about 10 miles per hour. Saw a hilarious tweet saying it's like he floated paper airplane out into the flat as it was taken back the rest of the way. Egregious red zone interception into the end zone, actually into multiple coverage, defenders around, and another pass out I think was intended for London with, again, multiple guys there. So as much as we all might want to see Michael Penix Jr. get the chance to take over, does not seem to be the case. Raheem Morris did say, talking about Cousins' future as a QB, quote, "I don't think that would be an issue," added he never considered putting Michael Penix Jr. into the game today. So again, Cousins has looked better at certain points, Dwayne, but this was rough. And just another example, man, this Falcons offense, every time that we think they're really starting to maybe get going and emerge into this very good or even elite offense, haven't quite gotten there.
Yeah, and it's really been a rough 3-game stretch for Kirk Cousins. Over the last 3 games, averaging 209 yards passing, 0 passing touchdowns in those games with 2.5 interceptions per. So yeah, it's been a rough little stretch here for Mr. Kirk Cousins. He's just at the point, Ian, and some of this may still be not 100% back from the Achilles. That's your plant foot you're trying to push off from. Everything kind of needs to be working like perfectly if you're going to continue to play quarterback at the age of Kirk Cousins. But the thing that I noticed just watching that game and watching all those picks, like he can't throw late like that. Like he doesn't have the drive on the ball. He doesn't have the zip to be able to make those sort of late throws. He's still fine when he's anticipating, right? And he and his receivers, their chemistry is not disrupted. Like his timing throws are still really good, but whenever he has to wait and go late, he has to hold the ball a beat long. It's really a problem because once it's in the air, there's just too much time for the defenders to react. So we'll see how it looks. We tend to overreact to these sort of things. Like a 3-game stretch, this sort of thing can just happen, to players. And then they can turn around and get super hot. I remember multiple times this year where we've talked about quarterbacks. Like Aaron Rodgers at one point was on a great 3-game run. Where'd that go? Completely in the tank. Well, guys can do the same thing, right? Where they look really bad for a few games and then bounce back. So I think Cousins still has the weapons and all those things to be fine. But I think the main point, is the one that you hit. We just haven't been able to see this offense, fully come to fruition of what we hoped for. You get rid of a play caller that we were kind of down on. Hopefully we're freeing all these playmakers, and Bijan and Drake London, they're getting the ball. Darnell Mooney's been great, but to your point, it's like they can never get everything in the golf bag going, right? It's like suddenly the driver goes bad. If they're hitting the short irons good, just throwing this in here for Ian, folks, Ian's a big golfer now, get the putter going, can't hit the wedge. It's been that sort of thing, for the Falcons. So, man, and this stretch has been rough. We'll talk more about the Bucs here in a little while, but it looked at one point like this would be their division. not so much anymore.
Team effort and coach effort, obviously. I thought there was really a bad game called from Zach Robinson, which we've seen several times this year. I mean, Dwayne, there were two separate drives that got killed. First on a Drake London fly sweep, and then on the Ray McLeod fly sweep on third and short. I feel like that play never works, man. And we had the Falcons actually try to pull it out twice this game, and again, get absolutely no good returns for it. So luckily, we do have a condensed offense that was able to give us plenty of fantasy points to the stars. Bijan Robinson wound up racking up 135 total yards and a touchdown on 32 touches. That is what I'm talking about. Falcons also had Drake London catch 9 of 16 targets for 86 receiving yards, even leaving quite a bit of meat on the bone with 135 unrealized air yards, second highest mark, when I pulled it mid Sunday afternoon. So bit of a dud from Darnell Mooney, only 20 scoreless yards on 6 targets. Thought he could have maybe had a touchdown on a, kind of button hook where Kirk just put it a little bit off target. Would have needed a little bit of yak though. And otherwise, Dwayne, just another disappointing performance from Kyle Pitts, who we thought we were finally starting to see get some level of consistency, but man, oh man, now we look up and yeah, you and I had as many yards as Kyle Pitts today, Dwayne. So not good at all. I mean, Pitts at this point, probably not next week because we do have, again, 6 teams on bye, but certainly, man, not someone who's rising up the ranks these days.
Well, yeah, I mean, and we've been downgrading him, and we just have to keep doing it. Over the last 4 games, averaging 3.4 PPR points per game, 72% route participation. Today it was a little lower than that, but only a 9% target share over that time frame, Ian. So I think we just have to call it on Kyle Pitts. I know we've been here and we've said we've called it, and then he'll tease us again, but he's just a sporadic player. This is just not a high-end player, at least not at this point, in his career. Never say never. We see some of these tight ends break out later, but it's just not happening, especially with Kirk Cousins struggling the way he is right now. Like for Kyle Pitts to be viable, like he needs the best version of Kirk Cousins. Of course, Kirk Cousins is probably saying, for me to be good, I need Kyle Pitts to do more. So, I mean, the blame gets shared a little bit. But yeah, man, Kyle Pitts is a mid-range tight end too. You really don't want him anywhere near your fantasy lineup if you can avoid it.
Just, man, 2 targets for Pitts, 16 for Drake London. I'm not, hey, Kirk Cousins knows who to throw to. Okay, that's a discrepancy, but man, what a discrepancy.
Well, you would think in a game where Darnell Mooney does nothing that Pitts does something. It's the McLeod getting the work instead of Pitts that is just like the bizarro land thing, and Bijan's a good receiver out of the backfield, so that hurts a little bit too. So a lot of things working against Kyle Pitts. Like really the only time I think you're going to want him in your lineup is those games where maybe, you get a Kirk Cousins comes in here and throws for 350 yards. But like, what are we waiting on here? Like Kirk Cousins, when he hasn't played the Bucks, essentially has not been good.
No.
I mean, all season. So as far as fantasy goes, right? I mean, we've got 2 big fantasy games this year from Kirk Cousins. I'm looking at it now. Okay. He gave you 24 points against the Saints. Right. So there was so there was another one, but yeah, it's mostly just, no, he didn't. This thing is just taking a second. Sorry. Just kidding. You didn't, Kirk Cousins. He gave you 17 against the Eagles, 18 against the Cowboys. So those were usable. Other than that, dude, it's been terrible for Kirk Cousins. Obviously the 2 big games against the Bucks, 34 and 28 points. I mean, we got 6 fantasy points, 11, 7, 12, 7, 10, 5. He scored 2 fantasy points today. Is this right? Am I looking at 1 quarter of play?
4 picks, man.
It is. This is correct. And so this is in leagues where picks obviously count 2.
Right.
Using True Media, and that's the setting in there. But still, yeah. So even if it's only 1 point for those, you got 6 fantasy points today. You're still not going crazy about it. Yeah, this is bad, man. Those are some major duds. A 6, a 7, a 7, a 5, and a 2.
There's just never any threat of going downfield. All right. Like it's not a slight towards London or, Darnell Mooney or anything like that. But so much of this game, man, is just the quick deep outs. You rarely see those guys get shots downfield. The only completion today over 20 yards was a 60-yarder to Ray McLeod that, guess what, was a deep out about 10 yards that honestly, Falcons got a little bit lucky that the cornerbacks jumped it and missed it because then Ray could pretty much run down the sideline unopposed. So not pretty. Still 6-6. Still has a chance, to make it out of that, pretty much a poo-poo NFC South and everything. But yeah, certainly not looking like the long-term quarterback. And I will say, Dwayne, every single day that goes by, man, that taking Michael Penix's pick at number 8 seems less and less egregious with the way Cousins is looking out here. So not great, Falcons fans, but hey, next week at the Vikings, God forbid they can give Kirk some time to throw. Maybe he can take advantage of that flammable secondary. Up next, I would say probably the game of the day. The Steelers took down the Bengals 44-38. Pittsburgh did indeed, went outright as 3-point dogs, so good for them. Overcashed at 46, and I believe even got there before the end of the first half. So points. The Bengals have now lost 4 games this season while scoring 33-plus points. And they had, after the 1 p.m. slate, the Ravens were close. So that's the only one that could prove me wrong here. But after the 1 p.m. slate, the Bengals were number 1 in the NFL in terms of total points scored and allowed this season. Just pure entertainment for everyone, other than Bengals fans. So shout out to the winners, though. Mike Tomlin, Dwain, now 18 straight seasons without a losing record. Thanks in large part, at least today, man, to Russell Wilson just continuing to dial back the clock. 414 yards, 3 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. That really wasn't even his fault, man. Pickens fell down. Honestly, looked like pass interference on the replay. And yeah, cornerback was able to take it the rest of the way. So took 2 sacks, but man, 44 points out of this team. 10.9 yards per attempt was the highest mark on the week. Russ is absolutely cooking, Dwain.
Yeah, Russ is looking good. Coming out here and throwing for 414 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. He did have 1 pick early in the game. Still not scrambling, still not doing very much on the ground, but definitely getting it done through the air. And again, it just looks like a really good fit for the weapons they have. So, I mean, now this is the 7th start that we've seen, the 6th start that we've seen for Russ since week 7. He's given us 25 fantasy points. Great. 14, not so great. 18, that's a usable week. Gave you a dud against the Ravens. That one really hurt because that was one of the weeks where we touted him the most, playing against that Ravens secondary. He gave you 6 points. Wasn't great against the Cleveland Browns. Didn't necessarily have to be. He only gave you 14, but then came back with 27 this weekend. So 3 usable, games. He's batting 500, but 2 of them have been absolute smashes with 25 and 27 fantasy points. So yeah, I think, heading into a week where we know we've got people hurting with Jaden Daniels out of their lineups, Lamar Jackson's not going to be available for, your game next week. A guy like Russ is someone that you can get plugged in.
We'll be facing the Browns next week. And again, didn't have the biggest game against them before, but in that absolute beautiful, I will say, Thursday night blizzard in Cleveland wasn't exactly a game that, again, you expected much of him anyway. So, of course, the star of the passing game was George Pickens. 3 catches on 6 targets for 74 yards and a touchdown. Again, showed off some of that underrated yak ability on his screen. But it was funny, Dwain had the father-in-law in town all weekend, for Thanksgiving and all that. And he's a big Steelers fan, so we're watching the game. And just after the Pickens catches, he's literally just going, go back in the huddle, George. Just don't do anything dumb. Please don't do anything dumb out here. And guess what? He did, man. He drew an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, got taunting. And now, Dwain, we do get this quote from Mike Tomlin after the game. He's just got to grow up, man. It's an emotional game. These divisional games are big. He's got a target on his back because he's George. He understands that. But he's got to grow up. We saw them quasi-bench him earlier in the year, man. We were complaining about those routes. Are you nervous enough, man, to drop him down at least, a couple of spots in sort of tiebreaker scenarios? Because maybe we do see a situation where, yeah, they try to make Pickens grow up a little bit.
Probably not. Because, I mean, dude, he's their whole passing game. If you don't have George Pickens out there, I'm sorry, this passing attack's not going to be very good. Like, Calvin Austin did some nice things, obviously got hurt today. Pat Freiermuth's shown up a little bit more the last couple of weeks. But it's kind of back to what you talked about, like, thinking back to the Falcons. Like, the guy that stirs the drink here that can make the big plays, the consistent everything you need is George Pickens. They have some other guys that can hit some bombs and things, but man, he can just do it against any type of coverage. He can do it against any corner in the league. Like, he's good enough to hold his own. So I just don't see a way. I mean, maybe in a really close tiebreaker, but honestly, he's moved up so much. Like, he's just sitting in such a high tier now. I mean, we've got him in the low end wide receiver 1 tier. It's just, with everybody having so many injuries, the bye weeks, like you said, coming, it's going to be tough to worry too much about that. I don't like the comment from Mike Tomlin, but I'm just not going to read too much into it for now.
Especially can't really afford to be taking more Steelers wide receivers off the field when Calvin Austin did appear to suffer a concussion, was officially ruled out with a head injury. So had a nice touchdown before on the skinny post, but yeah, man, just so
he got nailed 3 different times in this game. I'm talking blown up, obliterated. One by Cam Taylor-Britt underneath, one, by a linebacker, down the seam. That was a medicine ball. That was a hospital ball from Russ. Russ hung him out to dry a little bit on that one. And then there was another one as well. But yeah, this dude, hey, hat tip like to him, like majorly tough guy. But like when you take that many big hits like that and you're his size, it's going to be a problem.
161 pounds, Dwain.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe don't have him running over the middle quite as often. So get better soon, Calvin Austin. Otherwise, we'll see who is out there. Van Jefferson had a nice 43-yard catch today, but pull to Calvin Ridley, man, and Falcons fans will know exactly what I'm talking about, where he catches this ball, and if he just keeps running straight, he's in the end zone, but needlessly decides to cut it back and gets tackled short accordingly. So good job getting open enough to catch it anyway. But yeah, maybe we see more Ben Skrowanek or something out there. Always got plenty of 2 tight end sets going on in Pittsburgh as well, obviously. So
that dude's like another tight end.
He is.
Arthur Smith probably just loves him. He has like 7 tight ends he's running out there.
Just cutting up his run blocking highlights every day and just getting off there. But yeah, otherwise, man, with the backfield, Najee Harris, really nice game. Battled a leg injury. I thought it might be a hamstring at first, but this dude's probably not going to practice Wednesday. He'll probably be limited on Thursday, and he probably won't even have an injury designation ahead of next week's matchup against the Browns. Always playing through something and doing good with it, man. Again, racked up over 120 yards today for 7 missed tackles on his carries and looked good as a receiver as well. So really good stuff from Najee. But behind Najee, Dwain, did seem to be more of a split between Jalen Warren and Cordero Patterson than expected.
Yeah, we had 38% of the snaps go to, Warren. So, I mean, he was definitely the 2. But if you look at the rushing attempts, they both had 3. So, Jalen's just not getting very many of the carries, getting the passing down work. He had a 42% route participation, led the team, scored his dude scores 10 fantasy points like every week. Like, that's what you're getting. You're getting 10 fantasy points. He's essentially like their he's usually like their 3rd most targeted player each game now. And it's not like it's a lot. It's not like he's getting a ton of targets, but it's just enough that he catches them. And, he does nice things when he gets the ball in his hand. So Jalen Warren giving you 10 fantasy points per week, to your point, like with Cordero Patterson being there, that kind of takes a little bit of, it's kind of a buzzkill. And we don't want to ever say about the one true king. Nope. I know you're the leader of the fan club for CPAT, Ian. So not trying to say anything bad about Patterson, but for fantasy, obviously it complicates things, because I do think that Jalen Warren, if it's just him as the number 2, like he's more of a borderline running back 2, but because of this role for Patterson, it keeps him down in that running back 3 conversation.
Speaking of our one true king, 53 yards on 6 touches, Dwain. So maybe we should be ramping up those touches if we really want to be talking about usage here. But I kid. Jalen Warren, good in his own right, had 55 receiving yards and looks fully back to good health, man. I mean, I know earlier in the year we had that knee injury and he did not look like the same guy. He has looked like the same guy here that we saw last year be so great. But guess what? Najee Harris, apparently a better fit. And he's playing so well. Who can really blame old Artie for this usage anyway? So mentioned, but yeah, Steelers, again, another matchup against Jameis Winston and the Browns next week. We will see what goes down there. Only other final note would just be, yeah, you mentioned it, Dwain. Nice game from Pat Freiermuth, 68 yards and a touchdown, caught 6 of 7 targets. He being used enough to help some people out who might have some tight ends going to buy on week 14.
I don't trust it. It just feels like random, this worked out. This game just happened to work out for him. It's been the last couple of games, but it's still pretty much, that George Pickens is going to be the lead guy. Pat Freiermuth did lead the team with 7 targets today, 19% target share, gave you 18.8 fantasy points. I'm not going to move him up in the ranks, though. I would need to see a more consistent, target share, to be honest. He could be a low end tight end 1 on any given week. Like, yeah. I'm not saying there's Freiermuth's in a conversation of like 7 or 8 guys like that. Like, if we did upgrade him, what are we upgrading him to? Are we saying, he's getting into Hunter Henry's tier, right? Could he eventually push up there to be next to Hunter Henry and Zach Ertz? Like, I kind of feel like that's the ceiling. Like, if we suddenly did feel good enough about him, which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like, those guys are fine as low end tight end 1s. I don't think Freiermuth's quite there, though, because we've got a whole season. We've got 6 games with Russ, and really we've only got 2 that have been fantasy viable.
And also, it's almost like the Cole Kmet special, Dwain, where, yeah, sometimes when the overall passing game volume spikes, we're going to see him step up a little bit more. But, yeah, this was now just the second time in 6 starts that Russ has managed to clear 30 pass attempts in a game. So, yeah, great stuff for, again, the 9-3 Steelers, but probably wouldn't expect too many people behind George Pickens, if any, to be consistently viable performers in fantasy land. Over on the other sideline, just, again, another heart-wrenching, loss for the Bengals. Cannot wait to talk to my guy Chris Allen tomorrow morning morning and see how he's doing with this one. But yeah, man. Hey, Joe Burrow, though, continuing to make plays, 309 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. Even the interception was tipped at the line, and I would argue not really his fault. Did take 4 sacks and lost 2 fumbles on those, one of which was scooped and scored back in the end zone. But yeah, Dwayne, whenever we do have Burrow, Chase, and T. Higgins out there, we're pretty thrilled about all 3 of them, which, hey, is pretty much business as usual. And we're also thrilled about Chase Brown, who even coming off the bye sure still looked like he was the true 3-down workhorse in this backfield.
Yeah, for sure. Just real quick on Burrow, man. Like, if the Bengals had any sort of defense, like for this defensive coordinator that's been held for so long, like, man, like it's been an absolute struggle. Joe Burrow would be in the freaking MVP conversation, man. This dude has 30 passing touchdowns and 5 picks. I mean, he's averaging 278 passing yards per game in a year where everybody is, saying that the passing game is dead. Now it's gotten better here later in the season. But man, Joe Burrow is playing out of his freaking mind. Listen to these last 4 games. 251 yards passing with 5 touchdowns and 1 pick. They won that game against the Raiders. They come out against the Ravens. They lose with 428 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns. A loss to the Chargers with 356 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And then today, 309 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Obviously, they were down to the Steelers. He had some bad plays. Like he lost a fumble on a drive, that they had that was looking really nice. Of course, when you're playing against TJ Watt, you hold the ball a little long. That's going to happen to you. But man, just this dude's playing insane. Like he is playing lights out. Honestly, I would fire Zach Taylor. For Joe Burrow to be out here having to waste a year of his career, if you're a Cincinnati Bengal fan, I'm sorry, man. Zach Taylor's got to do more to help this guy. Zach Taylor's nothing. Joe Burrow is everything. Joe Burrow is just out here doing his thing. Just doing his thing. I'm telling you guys, has nothing to do with Zach Taylor. He has 2 good receivers, and he's just doing whatever he wants, and that's what's keeping Zach Taylor his job. Like they've got to do something, man. This is crazy.
You mentioned those 2 good receivers. They both managed to score today. 9 targets for Chase, 10 targets to T. Higgins. And again, man, another example that, yes, Chase is the better producer. We've all seen that. Just go back a few weeks and watch that film and you'll see it, man. But T. Higgins, man, I think he was something like the wide receiver 6 in PPR points per game coming in. Not going to be falling off much with this, man. His hands, man, got to be the strongest in the league. Just the amount of catches this dude makes outside of his frame, and even with someone draped all around him, never loses control of that sucker. So we'll note that
he leads the team in target share this year, even if you include, and in the games that he and Chase have been in together, man.
Sure.
Higgins leads the team in targets. Chase is the bigger playmaker, but T. Higgins is having the best year of his career.
Even drew 2 extra DPI penalties. So surely this organization that's never been known for being cheap, Dwayne, will do the right thing and get Higgins re-signed for next year. Sigh. So otherwise, Andre Yoshivas did catch a short touchdown, also drew a nice DPI in the end zone, proven to be a good wide receiver in his own right. Did seem like Jermaine Burton kind of fell out of favor here this week.
Yeah, which is wild because you didn't have Trenton Irwin. You didn't have Charlie Jones. You had multiple other guys hurt. But yeah, Jermaine Burton, who knows, maybe he just didn't show up to the meeting, had a 5% route participation. So not ideal. Also, Mike Gesicki took a downgrade in the route participation department. We saw the 2 games before the bye after the loss of Eric All, or 3 games without Eric All. He was in that 70% route participation range that fell to 57% today. Could just be a 1-game kind of little thing, but you would think in a game where you're trailing against the Ravens, you need your pass catching tight end on the field, that Gesicki would be a lock, right? To be out there. I was expecting to see 75, 80%. So that kind of surprised me. Everything else here, including the run game, Chase Brown still locked in, all business as usual. I don't think there's anything to talk about here from a utilization perspective.
Last thing I did want to bring up next week, Derrick Henry's on bye, Joe Mixon's on bye. I think we're giving Saquon Barkley benefit of the doubt as the RB1. That's fine. If you look at our Fantasy Life ranks on Wednesday morning, Dwayne, I have Chase Brown as the RB2 ahead of a matchup against the Cowboys on Monday Night Football. Will you be surprised?
No, I'll probably have him there too. I mean, he's going to get like 22 to 25 touches against the Cowboys. Yeah. Like, sign me up. Like, he's going to freaking go bananas.
He's great. I mean, he's playing well, catching passes as well. Chase Brown, the RB2 in fantasy in week 14, potentially. What a time to be alive. So, guys, before we keep on going, though, I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Game Time because, Dwayne, we both know there's nothing like being at a game in person. Now, I've been to some great ones over the years, even several Ohio State wins over Michigan. Luckily, I did not go ahead and take up Game Time on their fantastic offerings this past Saturday. But in the past, man, would have loved to be there because, my God, Game Time is my go-to for finding amazing tickets, not just for sports, but for concerts and shows too. I was actually scrolling the Game Time app the other day and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks, and it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats, and they make it so easy that it is really a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. All you have to do to check it out for yourself is download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Again, guys, whether you're going to a sporting event, a concert, a show, anything, all you got to do is go to the Game Time app and use code LIFE, LIFE, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but yeah, download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. I love that part, Dwayne. One of my favorite parts of any ad ever. Just gets me hyped. Ready to run through a wall, baby. Just like the Vikings were today when they took down the Cardinals 23-22. Arizona did cover as 3.5-point dogs. The under did sadly cash just barely at 45.5. So the Vikings, man, sitting pretty at 10-2. Maybe they haven't been the most dominant 10-2 team in the world, but still, man, just really an incredible season from Kevin O'Connell and company, given that, yeah, the quarterback you drafted in the freaking top 10 hasn't been able to play a single snap for you. So another good enough game from Sam Darnold. The box score looks very pretty, 235 yards and 2 touchdowns on 21 of 31 passing, and he led a nice, 8-play, 70-yard touchdown drive to win things at the end. So I'm not trying to come down hard on him. Maybe didn't exactly describe the game. Darnold played very well, okay? Not trying to take that away from him. Did take 5 sacks, though, and did have 3 straight plays at one point where each of them probably could have been intercepted. Alas, they were all just incomplete passes. So Darnold, Dwain, proving even in tougher matchups this week wasn't necessarily one of them, but even these past few weeks, not exactly turning into a pumpkin at midnight, which is awesome for everyone that has been willing to feature him and, again, I guess, trust him down the stretch. So next week, man, they're going to be home against a Falcons defense that we don't exactly think all that highly of. Sam Darnold, probably going to be a QB1 for us, man. How about that?
Yeah, man. I mean, Darnold's a low-end QB1, period. I mean, we talked about this. He got an upgrade last week in the utilization report due to how he had performed against the two better defenses. And, to be honest, the Cardinals have been pretty good here recently, not at the same caliber as like the Chicago Bears, but they've been pretty good. And, he had another nice game today, only 235 yards passing, but he gets the 2 passing touchdowns. I do believe his football IQ drops 100 points once he gets to the opponent's 30-yard line. I don't know what he starts thinking, but man, it's he just has complete meltdowns. It could have been really bad, but it didn't happen today. So he was fine. He gave you 19.6 fantasy points. That's 3 games in a row over 20. He's only got 2 duds on the season. I mean, he's been usable and near QB1 territory almost every single week from a standpoint of how many fantasy points he averages per game. So yes, Sam Darnold, low end QB1, nice matchup next week. So we'll take it.
Continuing to get his main guy pretty well involved. Again, maybe not seeing the generational 50 touchdown sort of campaign that we know Justin Jefferson is capable of. Still did have 99 yards on 9 targets today, even drew a 28-yard DPI penalty. So again, been a while since we've gotten those touchdowns, but I'd be surprised if it is much longer. Continue to treat him as the upside wide receiver 1 he's been throughout his entire short career. Otherwise, yeah, just not the biggest game from the other guys involved. Johnny Mundt caught a short touchdown. So did Aaron Jones, leaving Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson scoreless. So I did want to talk about some of the associated uses though, Dwayne, because Aaron Jones, man, fumbled twice more, lost 1 of them. He now has 3 fumbles, I believe, in the last 2 or 3 weeks out there. Also dropped a diving 13-yard score. So yes, he didn't completely dud in the box score thanks to catching that late game touchdown, but did seem just, again, from watching the game, like there was more Cam Akers out there than normal. Did that actually come to fruition in the utilization?
Yeah, 2 fumbles, 1 loss, definitely played a role. Only had 36% of the team's rushing attempts. After last week, looking like he was back in that bell cow role, and I think he was headed for that again today. And I do think his play is what determined, the fact that they got more of Cam Akers involved, and even some Ty Chandler mixing in. Ty Chandler got 14% of the rushing attempts today. So we'll see what they do moving forward. Sometimes, it's in the game, teach the guy a lesson, right? And then the next game, you're right back to kind of trying to feed him. We won't know for sure, I'll probably like lean somewhere in between those two things in the projections and assume they're going to, Aaron Jones is still the guy we're going to project as the clear number one. It's just by how much, because he's quietly been super dominant, like in these healthy games as far as his utilization. And even though we've got an offense that we like he hasn't like just completely exploded yet in fantasy. Like he's had nice games, but not the kind of games you would expect that if I told you, man, Aaron Jones has had all these games where he's in 70, 80% snap shares, you would be thinking, man, 25 and 30 point, fantasy games. That hasn't happened. So a lot of people haven't talked about the fact that he's really been in a dominant role. And then his health has also been a factor. So we'll see. Playing time definitely was down today with the fumbles. My guess is those still probably going to have him projected for over 60% of the carries again next week. So not going to worry about it too much.
Shout out to Cam Akers. Wasn't, again, just ripping off big run after big run, but the 18-yard run he did have with the stiff arm, man, brought back some memories of this preseason where he really was making the most out of all of his opportunities. Hopefully he is starting to, again, find those legs and just be a good NFL running back again. So I think that about does it here on the Vikings. Only other note I did have was Johnny Munt, man, really nice catch in the side of the end zone. You could tell, man, he didn't even put his heels down because he knew he was close to the line. You see why Kevin O'Connell called him the best number 3 tight end in the NFL once upon a time.
He was wide open, but nice job not putting the heels down. I know everyone was hoping, oh, TJ Hawkinson. It's TJ Hawkinson. Oh, it's Johnny Munt.
Dude, it's so annoying too. The 86 and 87. I know Hawkinson has a longer hair. It's not like we're dealing with a Goddard Ertz situation from a couple years ago. But despite the Munt touchdown, which was wide open, Mr. Dwain, did we see Hawkinson continue to have that, large route share that we saw him jump up to last week?
72%. So not quite as high as where we had been. We had another game without Josh Oliver, so we would expect him to at least be at that mark. But I think we're looking at, anywhere between 70 and 80% per week. The key will be like when they get Josh Oliver back, does it fall back into that 60% range? We'll just have to keep an eye on it.
Again, Falcons next week. So hopefully a good performance for Sam Darnold and the entire offense. Over with the Cardinals now. Kyler Murray, man, another game just left you wanting a bit more. That said, didn't find a way to get up to 260 passing yards, also chipped in 48 rushing yards. So as much as, again, just having watched it, real life views, we can say that maybe this wasn't a good game. At least, Dwayne, the bad Kyler games are coming along with more passing yards, which helped enable not one, but 2 fantasy relevant pass catchers, I should say, in the same game. What a time, man. Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. doing it in the same game, man. It is possible.
Yeah, man. Last 3 games for Kyler, 266 passing yards, 285, and then today 260. Now the touchdowns have not come along with it. That's been a challenge. Only 2 touchdowns over the last 3 games. Kyler's only averaging 1.1 passing touchdowns per game. So not ideal. Only has 13 on the season. So we'll see if they can get that aspect turned around. But to your point, for fantasy, at least having the yards there over the last 3 games, that makes it possible for these 2 guys to actually, put up the fantasy points that we're hoping for. It was a good game for both players today. I know, Ian, you and I, we do have a large amount of Trey McBride on our fantasy teams. And, he's steadily been there. Utilization's everything's been great, but it's really been these last few games where the big fantasy booms have come. He's steadily been in the top 4 or 5 tight ends all year, and utilization had been top 3, but it's really good now to see today he gave you that 21.6 fantasy points. If you were playing in a tight end premium, over at the FFPC, obviously that was closer to 30 points. So you were liking that quite a bit, especially if you were facing Brock Bowers. You need to offset some of that madness that happened with the Raiders on Friday. So yeah, Trey McBride did come through today. And then you mentioned it, Ian, Marvin Harrison Jr. with a nice bounce back game here. He had 12 targets, only 42% reception rate though. So still not quite fully on the same page with Kyler Murray. But man, a 28% target share. And I kind of saw this narrative going around Twitter of, you and I have talked about this with Marvin Harrison Jr. We talked about it actually even in a scouting profile, that if people were expecting him to come in and be like this, hey, you could just throw him all these quick screens and everything, and he's going to go nuts. We talked about that probably not being the strength of his game. But I am seeing people on Twitter be like, oh, Marvin Harrison can't do those things. Yes, he can, guys. If the coordinator calls a screen or a bubble or lets these guys run underneath routes, underneath coverage, anybody can do it. Anybody can get those catches. Those are the easiest catches to get. It's just a matter of, does your coordinator call it? So I don't think it's really fair to say that Marvin Harrison Jr. can't do those things. Are those the best ways to use his skill set? Probably not. But it's also not like if you look at the Cardinals, Who else are they feeding those targets to? Michael Wilson didn't good with them either. I mean, Trey McBride, of course, he gets those targets underneath. He does his thing. Greg Dortch is only a part-time player. So I actually do think that the Cardinals could rev up Marv a little bit more and give him some of those easy touches. You know, JSN, he's not a huge yak player. He's been better recently. The Seahawks, they feed him those sort of plays. Michael Pittman Jr. for years has been fed those sort of things.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's not breaking them, turning them into a long plays, but in fantasy, like, we will definitely take it. And I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is good enough to do those things. I will agree that's not the best way to use him. But I think long-term, like Marv, he's doing the things he needs to do. The thing that you care about the most is, can they win the targets on their own without all that help? I think Marv has shown that he can maybe not do it at the level that people want him. Like, yeah, I get it. He's not been Jamar Chase, which some people hope for. That probably wasn't realistic anyway, knowing how good Jamar Chase is. I mean, look, another good target share today. He has 23% on the season. That's good, man, for a first-round NFL draft pick, even though I get it. It's been a bumpy ride.
It's been a bumpy ride because we had psychopaths drafting them in round 1. All right. That's
I
the
know.
problem.
I know.
That is the problem. So if you remove that from the equation, then yeah, you're feeling a lot better about this season. So I'm looking at, some of the success from Cardinals wide receivers on screen plays right now. Shout out to True Media. Dwain, Greg Dortch, Zay Jones, and Michael Wilson have caught 8 screen passes this year and gained 25 yards. 0 screen targets for Marv. Can we at least throw him 3 or 4 and find out for sure?
Exactly. And again, he's not going to be Debo, but most guys are not. He's still good enough, Ian, that he can give you some point. He can give you some yardage on those plays. So it's fine. Like, I get that's not the best way to use him. I just think it's kind of funny when I see these things out there. They're like, oh, he can't do those things. Yes, he can. He absolutely can do those things.
Otherwise, yeah, man, you mentioned it could have been a bigger game. 122 unrealized air yards for Marv, third most, but came down with the touchdown. Just, not quite on the same page with some of those back shoulders. And yeah, still nothing easy to quite be had. But otherwise, man, just James Conner. Congrats, by the way, $18 million on the 2-year extension. Going to be the RB1 in Arizona, at least now through 2026. So sorry, Trey Benson dynasty bag holders. But yeah, Dwain still very much appears to be Connor's backfield. And for good reason, man. The guy's an absolute beast.
Yeah, nothing big to add here. 60% of the snaps, 55% of the rushing attempts, 46% of the routes. Like, he's basically where he's been for about the last 4 weeks. We did see Trey Benson eat more into his rushing attempts over the last 3 games. That was not the case. And I thought it was going to happen because right away, the first drive, they gave Trey Benson a short yardage, carry. And he did good. He got the first down on it, but ended up only with 10% of the carries today. So Trey had been in that 25 to 30% range over the last 3 games. Of course, some of it could have just been Amari DiMercato not really being well over that course of games where he was dealing with a shoulder injury and he was practicing more this week. So he had 3 attempts, which tied what Trey Benson had with 3 as well.
It's fine, Dwain. Look, they're just Dave Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs, right? That's what we can call every running back in the NFL at this point, right? So,
absolutely.
All right, I will
Monica
say
knuckles to you, buddy.
Exactly. So last note here is, again, Connor only 68 yards rushing on 17 carries, but guys, per True Media, 4.2 yards after contact per carry, minus 0.2 before. So again, this is a violent runner, man. His missed tackles numbers are up there with anyone alongside Kenneth Walker. Really has been a nice year, even if we haven't gotten the booms on the box score that his fantasy managers would appreciate. So otherwise, yeah, guys, think we can go ahead and move on to the Colts taking down the Patriots 25-24. Shout out to Drake May and company for covering as 2.5-point dogs, and the over did cash at 41.5. But in the end, it was Anthony Richardson leading the Colts down the field to score that game-winning touchdown and then the 2-point conversion after. So 10 plays, 80 yards in 5 minutes there down the stretch. Actually, 19 plays. Need to get my contacts updated. Yeah, it was a long freaking drive there down the stretch, man. Look, it wasn't great. 12 of 24 passing. We can go through the completion percentage stuff. There were 2 interceptions, as always, on Richardson. But at least on the last drive, man, it was good perseverance because A.D. Mitchell continuing to, not exactly do a great job of separating himself from that Dontavian Wicks comp, dropped a dime down the sideline. And then Kylan Granson also had one in the breadbasket down the seam. Couldn't hold on to that either. But Richardson kept the composure, went down and scored. So had 2 passing touchdowns, one to Jonathan Taylor, one to Alec Pierce, that again put the Colts in a position to win the game, at which point he ran in the 2-point conversion. So also had a rushing touchdown out there, Dwain. I mean, These are performances that we thought were going to be quite frequent throughout this year, but we had to deal with Joe freaking Flacco starting for 3 or 4 games, which made us look pretty stupid for at least me, a little bit more, I should say, touting Richardson as hard as we did in the offseason. But Dwayne, Colts do have a bye in week 14. Can we start getting back behind the guy, even with no more buys in week 15, as someone we legit want to start in our lineup on a weekly basis?
Well, we already did this last week. I want to say most of us had him inside the top 12. I had him in like 9. I think you were around 11, weren't you? So I think most of our rankers were already there. I mean, he gave you 21.2 fantasy points today, despite the fact that he only threw for 109 yards. I mean, because he ran for 48 and scored a touchdown, rushing. So, yeah, I mean, it's just one of these scenarios where we've talked about it so many times. When he is getting that rushing volume, like we have seen over the last 3 games, he's just going to be super hard to stop. And then when he has a blow-up game in the passing game, I know it was a dud passing game today. It was enough. It was enough that you still got the 21 fantasy points. But when he has the blow-ups, man, he gives you that 30-point upside. So, yeah, this looks like a floor now, right? I mean, a very bad passing game, but he's so involved on the ground. It's just really hard to hold Anthony Richardson down. Earlier in the year, whenever we were getting those dud performances, they were not letting him run the ball as much as they are right now. So that's the big difference with early season Anthony Richardson versus what we're getting today, is how integrated he is into the run game.
Again, not perfect. 0 for 8 on passes thrown, 20-plus yards downfield. But with the drops there, do you think it'd be a bit better if these Colts receivers were helping him out just a touch more? And sometimes the drop stats, I mean, this dude, again, doesn't quite have the curveball yet, Dwayne, just 100 miles per hour more times than not when he's throwing out there. But yeah, understand some of the shorter drops, but these really were not on him. So only other final Richardson note was, man, talk about a sweet signature celebration, man. Jumping 360 with the spike, move over Ryan Tannehill finger roll, man. That is absolutely fantastic, especially again when he is getting the W in real life as well. So otherwise, Jonathan Taylor worked his way up to over 100 total yards on 26 touches and caught that short touchdown. Disappointing game from the receivers. Dwayne, do you have anything to add other than I'm assuming Mitchell had a full-time role with Josh Downs out?
Yeah, no, all I was going to say is Taylor, regression game. And that's why you follow the volume. I know it was brutal and it was bad timing because Ian, I think the week before, I think he was one of our bold calls. And then Taylor had the dud. But man, when you're getting that many carries, and again, the Colts have been fighting through some offensive line challenges. I think they were without 2 starters this week. They were without 3 the 2 previous games. So looks like they're getting a little more healthy. But yeah, Taylor came through with 17.3 PPR points with 76% of the attempts. As far as the receivers go, Mitchell, a 60% route participation, despite not having Josh Downs or Ashton Doolin. So I don't know, man. That's not ideal. 0 points in the fantasy box score. It was a very Dontavian Wicks-like situation. You hate to see it. Both those guys getting to play, stronger roles this weekend. Neither one of them. Well, at least Wicks gave you like 7 fantasy points, but Mitchell was an absolute dud. I just want to call out Michael Pittman Jr. The last 3 weeks, Ian, here are his target shares: 29%, 28%, 29%. Obviously, when your quarterback's struggling, throws for 109 yards, it's not going to get you a lot of points. Over these last 3 games, 7.1, 12.6, and 6.7 PPR points. But Pittman is getting the targets. Now, we'll get Josh Downs back. But again, 2 of those games, that we've got the 29 and 28% target shares, those were with Josh Downs. So it really just feels like this offense is all about Pittman and Downs when they're both healthy. It's just a matter of, okay, are you getting an Anthony Richardson spike game or not? If you do, it could be okay. If it's not, if you don't, well, obviously it's bad for everyone.
Colts traveling to Mile High to take on the Broncos after that bye. So probably not trusting Pittman and company for that one. But hey, at least the run game looking good in Indy. Over with the Patriots, they will also have a bye in week 14. So nothing too pertinent here. But yeah, another fun game by Drake May at least. Man, wound up racking up 59 rushing yards, bulk of which came on a 41-yard run. So all scrambles, Dwayne. Again, you kind of talked about it last week. Can we use this guy's legs a little bit, man? I have not been impressed by Alex Van Pelt. I think for 1 second of the season. Even the touchdown pass, that was just Drake May making an amazing throw into a tight window that Austin Hooper came down with. So yeah, I mean, this is the Patriots this year. I'm very pleased that we got to see Drake May be an entertaining quarterback, make some plays, prove himself that he is worthy of being the guy for the future. But otherwise, man, just please replace almost everyone.
Yeah, Drake May is the most impressive passer from this class.
Yeah.
Like I'm telling you, you put some weapons around this guy, he looks really good. I get it. The picks have been there, but man, you go out here try and throw into Hunter Henry and Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas, and like these are your top guys going up against NFL defenses. Like you're gonna have to force some tight throws, man. That's just the way it's gonna be in your life. And I think once you get this guy some playmakers, I think the sky's the limit for Drake May. Just I think he looks great, man. And I get it. Like the box scores are not huge, but again, a lot of that I think does come back to the weapons. I think he's got a super bright future. So I just really like Drake May. My big takeaway is, man, if I can figure out a way to get him in Dynasty, I want to.
Ooh. 100% with you there. And again, maybe we'll see Ramondre Stevenson have some good years ahead. He did get that nice contract before, wound up having 21 touches here for 94 total yards, even has short Wildcat touchdown nullified on a correct holding call, but good to see them scheming up those instances. Only touchdown on the backfield actually went to one Antonio Gibson, who look good out there, man. He's had a couple games like this, not over the course of the whole year necessarily, but 62 yards and a touchdown on 7 carries, broke 7 missed tackles, along the way, tied for second most on the week. So good stuff there. But otherwise, yeah, Hunter Henry caught 7 to 9 targets for 75 yards. But Dwain, like, isn't it split enough between Henry and Hooper that sadly we can't even fully get behind, Triple H there?
Triple H, 85% route participation. So no, we can. I mean, Hooper is just like, he's usually between 35 and 40%, but it's in addition to Hunter Henry. He's not stealing his work. So Hunter Henry, low end, tight end 1. Nothing else to add here. Did Kendrick Bourne have a touchdown called back? I thought I saw him score early. Was that one taken off the board?
Short one on illegal shift. You are correct.
Okay, I thought so. So yeah, I mean that was another thing for May, but nothing to talk about here with the wide receivers. Kendrick Bourne did have his highest route participation of the season at 70%. We had KJ Osborne was inactive for this one. So like Kendrick Bourne, man, like he was the guy that, up till week 8, whenever he blew out his ACL last year, he was their wide receiver 1. Not that he's been great, but I mean, would it surprise us if Kendrick Bourne's like a 22% target share guy to like finish the season and suddenly becomes the number 1 for Drake May? I think if you're in a really gross league, like, and you're just trying to figure something out, like that's one name I would keep an eye on, just mainly because I think Drake May is playing good.
33 million reasons why for the Patriots to hope that Kendrick can't be that guy, pal. So we'll be facing the Cardinals after their bye. Maybe that is a matchup where guys like Kendrick Bourne can get going. Moving on, though, we had the Seahawks take down the Jets 26-21. They did cover as 1-point dogs. Obviously, the over did cash here at 41.5. So Geno Smith, all-time great revenge game post, had the dude, was just chilling, basically, dressed up to go to his enemy's, funeral or something like that. Long time, just meme lore there. Love seeing Geno always being active on social media. But 206 yards and a touchdown on 20 of 31 passing. Took 3 sacks out there. Maybe not a perfect performance. Got some help from his defense. Big Leonard Williams rumbling for like a 98-yard touchdown out there. But hey, Dwain managed to get JSN to 74 yards, DK Metcalf to 66 yards, and again, overall did enough to get a win for the 7-5 Seahawks. So unfortunately, I need to quit trying to say running backs are going to have big games against the Jets because I was wrong about JT and I was wrong about Kenneth Walker, who had just 46 total yards on 18 touches. Once again, had a, relatively short touchdown. I don't want to say stolen by Zach Charbonnet. He's a good running back in his own right. Had a couple nice runs out there today. But yeah, man, just unfortunately now, I guess the second half we thought could be coming from Kenneth Walker. So only, I think, major question I would have about the utilization, Dwain, because it does seem pretty much business as usual. We did get the return of Noah Fant. However, it was A.J. Barner getting that touchdown. So maybe not something we can exactly rely on. Certainly wasn't something we could surely hang our hat on before anyway.
Yeah, the notes I had written down on my sheet for this is I had the top thing here is really the difference is Fant's return to a full-time role, 77% route participation. Okay. AJ Barner did get the touchdown, but it was Fant playing more. Now, I don't know what we can really say this is even worth because Fant just really hasn't been able to step forward and earn more targets, right? Even with that playing time. But we'll take it. If a guy can be 75, 80% route participation, they can run into a tight end 1 finish. We got a lot of teams on bye. Maybe you're hurting this week. Fant is a name that you could potentially look at. JSN, Metcalf, to your point, they were just doing their normal thing. So was Kenneth Walker. Like, he still had the same role. He's really dominated now for 4 weeks in a row. Like, in that role that we saw him in early in the year, the fantasy points just haven't followed. Only 6.6 today. But, I mean, he's so due, man. Kenneth Walker is due for a massive game. Like, it's coming.
It's going to be 5 straight games under 4 yards per carry. He's actually only cracked that mark 3 times on the season. So certainly not exactly running away from that boom or bust rushing style label, but more weeks than not, we have gotten some good receiving production. So at a minimum, nice to see that. And I think if you guys have watched a couple of Seahawks games, we can most likely attribute this more so to that offensive line than anything. So last note on Fant would be he was open enough to catch a short 1-yard touchdown. Unfortunately, that was not Geno's best throw of the day, and we were left sheeshing. Over there with the New York Jets, Aaron Rodgers, man, looks spry out there. I was actually shocked to see how well he was moving around early. They used him as a lead blocker, which questionable decision, maybe trying to get the guy hurt and not to worry about it anymore. I don't know, Dwayne. I'm just saying what maybe other people are saying. Also was scrambling around out there. And again, just looking spry. However, did not help the overall passing game. Just 21 of 39, man. 185 yards and 2 touchdowns with some bad misses. I mean, Garrett Wilson had a sick double move to get wide open from 10 yards out. Sick sluggo route. And unfortunately, Rodgers sailed that one. And there's a 4th and 2, dude, where Davante Adams, as he's known to do, got a ton of separation on his release on a nice little slot fade and probably got chalked up as a drop. But man, he had to dive for a ball that if it had just been put in his breadbasket, he's probably waltzing into the end zone and, worrying about what touchdown celebration he's going to do. So wound up being 97 unrealized air yards for Davante Adams. That was the 8th most on the week. And yeah, right after that miss to Garrett Wilson, he threw that big man revenge game interception to Leonard Williams. So really was, I thought, one of Rodgers' worst performances of the season, all things considered. And yeah, Dwayne, we've seen him make some good throws throughout the year, but just not happening. Without an injury, do you think he's starting the rest of the season?
Yeah, I do think he is for now. I mean, they've just come out and said that no change for now. But I don't know. We'll see if he makes it the rest of the way. 151 yards, 184 yards, 185 yards over the last 3 games. So not ideal. And sorry for my pause. Like CMC took a really weird step.
Oh no.
And immediately went down, and he is now in the blue medical tent. I hope it's not his Achilles. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, Rodgers, man, like it's just not been good, from a fantasy perspective. So not ideal, man, when you're trying to feed it's hard to get too excited about Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams, despite their target share, when you can't throw for over 185 yards per game in 3 games in a row.
Speaking of first round running backs getting injured and breaking our fantasy dreams, Dwayne, we did have Breece Hall playing through the pain of a knee injury. However, had 2 fumbles, lost one of them, and I was surprised to see he did get 1 target. He didn't catch it, but a lot of Braylon Allen out there, and even a lot of Isaiah Davis, to his credit, actually did end up scoring a touchdown. So less usage than normal for Breece Hall.
No, Breece was in his normal role, man. 60% of the rushing attempts, 61% of the snaps. We've had games where he's higher than that, but that's like basically been the bottom end of the range since we've seen the play caller change with Todd Downing. So nope, nothing different here. Just 6 fantasy points to go in a normal role, which is not ideal. We did, to your point, saw Isaiah Davis get out there and get a little bit, but only 1 carry for Isaiah Davis, and it was still really mostly Braylon Allen behind Breece Hall.
Otherwise, guys, think that one about does it for the Jets. Hopefully, things get better. Can't get much worse at 3-9. So before we keep on keeping on, do want to give a shout out to us over here at Fantasy Life, guys, because we are keeping the sale going from Black Friday. Not sure if you heard Dwayne, but Matthew Berry actually went a little bit off script on SiriusXM last Wednesday and doubled the plan discount for our Black Friday sale. So everyone listen up. You can get 50% off any Fantasy Life Plus package with code BFF50. That's right, 50% off Fantasy Life Plus with code BF50. This will cover the entirety of this season fantasy football playoffs, next fantasy football draft season, and the entire first 12 weeks of next year. So that is all of our expert consensus rankings, utilization score, suite of tools, projections, start, sit, and so much more. Fantasy Life Plus also includes sports betting and DFS tools. So please, guys, go to fantasylife.com and use code BF50 to get your 50% off Fantasy Life Plus. That's promo code BF50 for 50% off Fantasy Life Plus. The Commanders took down the Titans 42-19, covering with ease as 6-point faves and nearly covering the over on their own at 45. So they will have a week 14 bye to get right, which is great for them. Not great for fantasy managers who need to rely on Jaden Daniels, though, because he once again proved, Dwayne, that he is awfully good at football. 206 yards through the air, not 1, not 2, but 3 touchdowns. Also chip one in on the ground with 34 rushing yards. So again, it wasn't like Daniels was playing bad over the course of this relative cold streak, but But I mean, I'm looking at it right now, man. And before last week's overall QB1 finish, which let's face it, had a lot of garbage time attached to it, wound up not being garbage time because the Cowboys can be idiots at times. But you know what I'm saying? Before that, though, man, had let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 straight games without a, finish inside the top 10. So nice to see with the fantasy season really coming into focus here at the end. Jayden Daniels is back to being, a freaking baller in fantasy land.
Yeah, 30.4 fantasy points last week, 27.6 this week. So, and very involved on the ground. I think he's just healthy now. I think we had that stretch, where he got hurt, and that was a major issue, for at least 2 games. The Steelers game and the Eagles game, he just did not look like himself. Didn't look like himself in the Giants game either, but the Giants were bad enough that it ended up being okay for Jayden Daniels in that one, but looks better over these last 2 weeks. So yeah, man, I think Jayden Daniels back into just being, and we never really moved him. Like, he's been in our top 4, but I mean, now he's at that spot where obviously you got the bye week next week, but in most weeks you're going to be able to make an argument like, should he be the QB1 overall? Mostly we're going to give that to Lamar Jackson, maybe Jalen Hurts, but he's in the conversation. That's the main point.
Got it. Love that. And gotta love Brian Robinson, man, looking healthy out there on his way to racking up 103 yards and a touchdown on the ground. However, it was not just a beat Rob show. Jerry McNichols, okay, a little bit involved, 6 carries for 32 yards, but no, he was not cut. Well, he was cut, but they just signed him back and gave him the football again, Dwain. Chris Rodriguez, 13 carries, 94 yards and a touchdown. I presume a lot of this did come in the garbage time, but kudos to the man for racking up 4.9 yards after contact per carry. So we are going to be missing now Austin Eckler for at least the next 3 weeks after this one. He was placed on IR with that concussion. So didn't exactly seem like we were getting the workhorse role out of Brian Robinson here, Dwain, but could be a mix of him still not exactly being at 100%. And with the bye, at least to get a little bit better, you would think with no Eckler in week 15 and beyond, Robinson has a good chance of being in our top 12.
Yeah, for sure. Over the first 3 quarters, 61% of the snaps today, 54% of the rushing attempts, 40% route participation. Those are really strong numbers, but those are numbers that we've seen from Brian Robinson, even whenever we've had Austin Eckler available. So I do think a little bit of it was a hedge against the injury, but if you look at it and you just at first glance, you're like, oh, 46% of the snaps. No, that was due to what happened in the fourth quarter, which was Chris Rodriguez related. The fourth quarter, he had 12 attempts, Rodriguez did. He only had 1 carry before that in the game. So he ended up with a 30% snap share, 30% of the rushing attempts. It all came in the fourth quarter. So Jeremy McNichols was still really the running back 2 before that. He had a 35% snap share, 21% of the rushing attempts, and a 27% route participation over those first 3 quarters. Only gave you 3.2 fantasy points and not really playing like he didn't get as much of the passing work, right, that Austin Eckler had been getting before. And that's what I think we would need from McNichols to feel like he could even be in that running back 3 conversation with Brian Robinson Jr. playing. So I tend to agree with you. I think when we look at this coming out of the bye, we might be leaning towards a Brian Robinson Jr. as running back 1 overall, but still not able to get Jeremy McNichols anywhere higher than like maybe a low end running back 4 because we just haven't seen enough, especially if in like a closer role, like they're in a blowout situation. I get it. On one hand, it's like, oh, well, Rodriguez just got it all in junk time, but that's a role. That is a role in and of itself, and it doesn't belong to Jeremy McNichols. It belongs to another guy. So that just means that McNichols, like, it's pretty thin, man. His outs don't seem to be, he doesn't seem to have very many outs, but we will feel good about Brian Robinson Jr. until we get Austin Eckler back.
Mentioned Jayden Daniels' passing game production before, and accordingly, his top 2 targets had nice little afternoons at the office. Terry McLaurin caught all 8 of his targets for 73 yards and not 1 but 2 touchdowns. 3rd game this year with multi-scores and a career high 9 on the season. Previous career high mark was just 7. So safe to say Terry has been freed, and my God, it is wonderful. And also Zach Ertz, man, continuing to do good things out there. Caught 3 of 6 targets for 35 yards and a touchdown. And yeah, Ben Sinnett continues to do pretty much nothing. So maybe a bright future for the rookie, but right now this is Zach Ertz's tight end room. Otherwise, I think we are pretty much good on Washington. Dwayne, they do have a bye next week. So again, be happy you have Jayden Daniels, Brian Robinson, and Terry McLaurin. They will have, let's see, the New Orleans Saints after that. So revenge game for Marshawn Lattimore if he ever decides to start playing. Otherwise, should be a good matchup for all parties involved. Now with the Titans, we have Will Levis take a bit of a step back, completed just 18 of 37 passes, 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. That said, Titans did drop a week high 4 passes, took 2 sacks along the way. So they're facing the Jaguars next week, Dwayne. That is a matchup that we want to prioritize. Have you seen enough from Will Levis in this passing end to get behind him as a recommended streamer with, again, a tough week that's going to feature Lamar, Bo Nix, Stroud, Richardson, May, and Jaden Daniels all on bye?
Yeah, I mean, I think worst case scenario, you can do it. In the 2 games before, he had 295 and 278 passing yards. He still gave you 2 passing touchdowns today, even though he only threw for 212 yards. So it was a tough day as far as the completion percentage went, but he also had a 10.4 average depth of target. Typically, as the ADOT goes up, guess what goes down? Your completion percentage. Now, you don't want it below 50%, but you would say, hey, if he was around 60%, we wouldn't feel so bad about that. So, yeah, he's still going to be lower than a lot of other guys we would prefer. Like, I would still rather have Russell Wilson, but the matchup does definitely make it viable, Ian. Like, if you are on a real crunch, I could see you having to, in a skank league, lean into Will Levis, and the timing is really good just because he gets the Jaguars.
Mention those 2 touchdowns, and who'd they go to? That's right, our one true king, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. He can't stop, won't stop, Dwayne. He's getting away with it each and every week. Now has 8 touchdowns in his last 8 games. The only players with more receiving touchdowns than Nick Westbrook-Ikhine this year: Jamar Chase, Terry McLaurin, and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Imagine if this guy had 100 targets, he'd have 40 touchdowns.
Why don't we throw it to him every single play? What's the problem?
I mean, it's just math. This is the way it works. Seriously, doesn't he have like 20 catches on the year and 8 of them are touchdowns? It's insane.
It is insane.
It's insane. Yes, it's 20 receptions on the year and 8 of them have been touchdowns. That is just absolute insanity. Here's the thing, though. I wrote it up in the utilization report last week. I was, look, either Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has to improve his utilization score to get himself off of the Fugazi list, or he has to stop scoring touchdowns. I think I can maybe take him off the Fugazi list because, listen to this, Ian, in 4 of the last 5 games, he has cleared a 20% target share.
Okay.
So 22%, 13%, 21%, 20%, 22%. Now, not all of those have been super catchable. That's been an issue. He and Will Levis have not been completely on the same page. Obviously, some of those were with Mason Rudolph as well, going back that far. But hey, that is enough that I think I can get him off the Fugazi list. And that's the way you want to get off of it. Like, you don't want to get off the Fugazi list because finally, like, your touchdown streak came to an end. And, it's just because it was bound to happen. It's because you actually have been earning enough targets to get off of it. So I'll have to mention him in the utilization report in a more positive light tomorrow. It was his best target share of the year today at 22.2%.
Again, it's wild. He's not going to keep this right up. Maybe he will. Maybe he is just the best wide receiver ever. Shout out YouTube fam who can see my lovely display name here, calling him Gen Z Jerry Rice. So that slander aside, I mean, I'm looking at the touchdowns right now, Dwayne. Second one, a little bit of a sat in front of the safety on the zone, but first one, just one against man coverage. I know the Commanders' defense isn't exactly an all-world group, but hey, dude's going out there and making plays. Got to give him some love accordingly for that. So Jaguars next week, nice matchup. Not going to be, knocking on that top 24 door just yet, but my God, Dwayne, wherever you rank him, rest assured, I will have the artist known as NWI at least one spot higher. Ultimately, though, it was a bit of a dud game for Calvin Ridley. Caught just 2 of 7 targets for 45 yards, showing us that, yes, sometimes these sort of things can happen with the Will Levis experience. Remains more of a boom or bust wide receiver 3 than anything. Last thing, though, for the Titans, Dwayne, Tony Pollard lost a fumble, still had, 12 touches for, 68 total yards. Seemingly, though, dominated his backfield despite the return of Tajay Spears.
Yeah, he did. He had 72% of the snaps, 73% of the rushing attempts, and a 56% route participation, despite having Tajay Spears available. He only scored 8.8 fantasy points today, but again, did have the role. Tajay Spears, 0.3 PPR points with only 26% of the snaps. So, yep, no other updates, though, on the Titans. You mentioned it. Ridley was out there. It was just a dud game for him, but we'll feel good about him again next week with the Jaguars.
Cannot trust Spears by a long shot as a standalone option. However, guys, he does have that dropping ESPN and Yahoo ownership rate. And I will just say, man, God forbid something happened to Tony Pollard. I believe that the Titans believe they're interchangeable enough where Spears will be getting this 15 to 20 touch roll more weeks than not. And accordingly, is still one of the better handcuffs alongside guys like Braylon Allen and, all those sorts of dudes whose names escape me while I'm live on a podcast that you guys know you should be loving there down in the lowly ranks. So only injury to monitor would be Noah Brown with that rib, but I do even think he managed to return late. So I think we can move on from this one, Dwain, to the last matchup of the early afternoon slate. The Texans taking down the Jaguars 23-20. Jacksonville did cover as 3.5-point favorites, absolutely ruining one Ian Hartitz's parlay, but we will watch the film and get better. The under did cash here at 44.5. So with the Texans, I mean, good to get a win because it's always good to get a win in the NFL, man, but wasn't exactly, the blow-up performance we were hoping for against a defense that, has been a mix of bad and just quitting on life throughout most of the season.
Yeah, man, CJ Stroud in this one, we were hoping for more, 242 passing yards and 1 touchdown. I mean, yeah, you're hoping for like 325 and 3 when you play against the Jaguars. Again, to your point, got the win, did what they needed to do. It got a little bit close at the end. The game was not as close as it seemed. Got a little closer at the end with Parker Washington, which they were calling him something else on NFL Red Zone. Not even Casey Washington. C something Washington. I was like, is this a middle name for Parker Washington? I'm not sure about. But anyway, yeah, going back to the Texans, I don't know why I'm talking about a Jaguar right now. Pretty much business as usual from all the utilization stuff. I'll let you hit everything here. But Joe Mixon, 75% of the snaps, 90% of the rushing attempts. He gave you 21.9 fantasy points in the box score today. Just doing the normal Joe Mixon thing. So he did his thing. And then I think the biggest thing here to talk about is it's our third game when Nico Collins back. And he continues to see that route participation get higher and higher. Got to 85% in this one with 11 targets at a 33% target share. No one else was really heard of outside of the sicko call Dalton Schultz, Ian, who had a 21% target share. Just a random shot in the dark hit on a sicko call. 17.1 fantasy points for Schultz, 19.9 for Nico Collins. Unfortunately, our guy Tank Dell just wasn't able to do much today, Ian. 12% target share, but he was out there. 87% route participation. He was out there running routes, just not getting targets.
You're a bigger man than me, Dwayne. I thought you were going straight to Schultz after talking to Stroud, but no, had to give Nico his flowers for those 119 yards. Good call by you, Dwayne.
Hey, and to be fair, I ended up, we did do Dalton Schultz on the show. I wrote about Dallas Goedert in the column though. Because I was, so we hit 2. Yeah. We hit 2 of them. But I didn't have strong enough convictions to actually write Dalton Schultz's name up after we had the show. So I can't really do any victory laps.
61 yards and a touchdown for Schultz. Wasn't on busted coverage, sure, but hey, he scored. So good for Mr. Schultz and all of his friends and family. Mentioned the Tank Dell dud. Would have been a lot cooler if he didn't get underthrown on what probably should have been a walk-in 67-yard touchdown. But again, that sadly has been the case a bit too often than we would prefer with CJ Stroud and company this season. So Texans will be on a bye. Guess what? We're loving Joe Mixon and Nico Collins in any matchup. But yeah, man, Dolphins, Chiefs, and even the Ravens, I don't exactly expect CJ Stroud to all of a sudden hit his groove against those defenses, but maybe, just maybe, he can get it done. They're going to have to really earn his way back up the fantasy ranks before we come near him. Otherwise, man, Jacksonville Jaguars performance just marred by that horrible hit on Trevor Lawrence. Azeez Al-Shahir ejected, should be suspended. Not his first rodeo hitting guys after the whistle, just truly nasty stuff. So shout out Evan Ingram for being the first to defend T-Law and start a bit of a, brawl after college football had plenty of them, less than 24 hours before. But yeah, absolutely nasty concussion. And look, Dwayne, we've seen some guys come back in 5 days from concussions. Some guys, are put on IR and it takes a couple more weeks. But given he's already playing through the left shoulder issue, let's shut the guy.
Why play him? Yeah, I won't be surprised if they shut him down. And look, Mac Jones actually came in and had his best game.
Yeah.
I mean, he was serviceable today. Dude came out here and threw for 235 yards and limited action. He played 71% of the snaps today, so still played most of the game, threw 2 passing touchdowns. Kind of what we thought you might be able to get from Mac Jones in the other 2 games. We were never claiming Mac Jones could be this great player, but come on, he can throw for 220 yards, right? I think the former first-round draft pick can do that. Not so fast, my friend. As Lee Corso would say, it hasn't worked out, but today it did. So we'll see what happens. Again, I won't be surprised. If they do shut down Trevor Lawrence. As far as the one thing I would say we need to talk about on the Jaguars, we can hit their backfield, but since we just talked about the passer, Parker Washington, man, had a 91%.
By the way, his real name is Chris. Everyone calls him Parker, but his real name is apparently Christopher. So I think that's what Hansen was going with.
No, it wasn't. What? Yeah, yeah, it was what was showing. Yeah, like on. I don't even know if he called him Christopher.
Okay.
I just know it was what was showing every time they would show the
Weird.
leaderboard for the day. But I've never heard it as
No.
Christopher or seen it anywhere. But maybe he told him that. So yeah. But Parker Washington had 12 targets. He led the team with a 91% route participation. He scored 24.3 fantasy points today. So I really thought that this target tree would consolidate around Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram, with Christian Kirk and with Gabe Davis out. It turns out that maybe Parker Washington is a bigger threat to targets than Gabe Davis, which isn't like a huge stretch. And we haven't really seen Parker Washington. This could also just be a complete flash in the pan, guys. These sort of games, target share, yes, is a major indicator of, being talented. But in any one game, like, you can just end up with a high target share. Like, so this can still just be a very random one-off sort of situation. I would still rank this, receiving core as Brian Thomas Jr. at the top with Evan Ingram and then Parker Washington after that. But I know we have 6 bye weeks on the way, and a lot of you are hurting. So Parker Washington will probably be one of the top waiver wire ads this week, even if we are looking at a situation where we're going to have Mac Jones under center next week.
They get the Titans, who earlier in the year were looking like a very formidable pass defense, but through a mix of injuries and maybe just regression, have not exactly been that same beast here in recent weeks. So I'm with you, man. Washington looked good and honestly had a better ball 15-yard touchdown chance. Unfortunately, probably should get used to, again, more continued inaccuracy in a passing game that, let's face it, even with a healthy T-Law under center, wasn't exactly running away with the on-target, pass percentage crown as it was. And we saw that from Brian Thomas, man. Both quarterbacks actually missed him on long potential touchdowns. He got underthrown on a potential 77-yard score from T-Law that ended up being picked off, and then overthrown on a potentially nice 69-yard touchdown from Mac Jones. Certainly going to be writing him up big time in the Sheesh report. Week high 190 unrealized air yards, Dwain. So still found a way to not kill you. Had a 56-yard catch and run on a short drag, caught a touchdown in the back of the end zone later, so round up at 76 yards. But truly, this is one of those games where, 76 yards and a touchdown. Good job, Brian Thomas Jr. Could have legit been 200 plus and 3, not even, much of an exaggeration going on there. So Evan Ingram only caught 7 to 9 targets, not only solid enough game, especially in, that lovely tight end premium scoring. I shouldn't say lovely. I'm not really a big fan of tight end premium, Dwain. Just calling a spade, sue me. But yeah, man, again, defended T-Law. We'll go out there, and just good seeing this passing game give us something with Mac Jones under center, again, ahead of that winnable matchup against the Titans. So last thing, Dwain, would be fully healthy Tank Bigsby coming out of the bye. Was this more of a 50-50 split with Travis Etienne, or was, again, the usual starter in Jacksonville playing with his usual bell cow role?
Man, the snaps were close, 52% to ETN and 46% to Tank Bigsby. But 52% of the rushing attempts to ETN and only 28% to Tank Bigsby. But Tank Bigsby in Bizarro land gets a 49% route participation ahead of Travis Etienne.
There's one thing he shouldn't be on the field for. Come on.
I know. And you would think Bigsby, like, if it was going to be close, like, it would be splitting the carries, but then it let ETN have the passing down work. So it's, Doug Peterson and that crew took that bye week, Ian, just to scheme up some really dumb stuff. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Not ideal, though. Look, we just have an offense we don't like, and we have these two guys sharing, and it's in an unpredictable fashion. I would say that we right now have to say that Travis Etienne is the running back 1. But what is that really worth in fantasy football? I on a week where you don't have bye weeks, I don't see how Travis Etienne gets into your top 24. I still think he's, like, at best a high-end running back 3 in any week. Like, it could be a complete rug pull. Maybe they just give Tank Bigsby more carries, and then Tank Bigsby, unfortunately, has fallen into running back 4 territory. Like, we just can't really use him. Like, if you're using him, it's a desperation play at this point.
This was the game with Dearness Johnson as a healthy scratch. So not even a given that's going to persist the rest of the way. Still not an offense we want to be overly exposed to in Fantasyland. But my big takeaway from this Jaguars season is that Brian Thomas Jr. is an absolute dog. So we should at least be happy about that moving forward for Duval. All right, guys, let's get into the late afternoon slate. The Rams took down the Saints 21-14 in the Superdome. Sorry, Cooter Doodle and fam. Rams did cover as 2.5-point faves. The under cashed here at 49. So Matthew Stafford, not the blowout performance maybe we were hoping for, Dwain, but still completed 14 of 24 passes for $183 and 2 scores. Found Puka Nacua for 1 and DeMarcus Robinson for another. And hilariously, now DeMarcus Robinson has 7 touchdowns on the season, doing his best Nick Westbrook or Keenan IND-NE impression. For those counting at home, Cooper Kupp and Puka combined also have 7. So I understand the
Hey,
gate.
NWI is doing the Demarcus Robinson impression. D-Rob's been doing he did this last year. He's
That's
been
true.
doing this longer. But
That
yes,
is
very
true.
similar. It is a very, very similar thing.
So again, I'm not saying you can trust DeMarcus Robinson, but what's so hilarious, Dwayne, is as someone who did, and it's working out fine. We'll take 7 touchdowns out of a freaking almost last round fantasy pick in best ball. Like, that's great. But the thought process was like, okay, we can get these spike weeks when they're healthy, but man, if something happens to Puka or Cooper Kupp, like, we could really get behind Robinson then. We got nothing out of him when that happened, dude. Like, this is one of the very, very rare instances where, yes, when you have better players on the field to take away attention, you're seeing D-Rob go make some plays. So obviously Puka and Kupp are still the kings there. And Puka, my God, Dwayne, I cannot remember a wide receiver just more consistently making these full extension diving catches than the stud second-year talent. So Puka Nacua, I know I didn't draft as much as I should have, even just putting the injury aside, like, should have drafted more Puka this August, man. Have never been more sure about just how damn he is at football. Maybe some of that is Cooper Kupp, getting a bit longer in the tooth, busted quite a bit today. Already saw Paul Charchian having him on the chopping block, highlighted player, just 3 catches for 17 yards. But moral of the story, Dwayne, even against the Saints defense that, let's face it, not a world-beating unit, when this Rams offense has everyone healthy, man, they are really a problem for anyone to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, 35% target share today for Nacua, 26% for Cooper Kupp. So, yeah, he dudded for you, 4.7 fantasy points, but like all the underlying data was still there. It just, these sort of things happen. They just happen to you. Puka is the wide receiver 1 in LA, though. I mean, we've talked about it for a few weeks now. Now it's close. That's not like a damning thing that we're saying about Cooper Kupp. He looks like the better player right now. He looks like the healthier of the two. He looks like the guy that's just, I mean, obviously he's younger, like he's breaking more tackles, all those things. So to your point, maybe it's a little bit of getting older for Cooper Kupp. It could also just be, those high ankle sprains, even though we think people are better, man, they can linger.
That's true.
And we hear players talk about it all the time, how they weren't the same the rest of the season after the high ankle sprain. So that could be a factor for Cooper Kupp as well here. Look, you're happy to have either one of them on your fantasy team. And yes, when Matthew Stafford has these two guys, even though to your point, like this was not an ideal game today for Stafford, only ended up throwing for 183 yards, but he still got the 2 touchdowns. Yeah. So he ended up with 15.6 fantasy points. Not like the 20 you were hoping for, but he didn't give you a complete dud either. He at least gave you a respectable 15 to keep you hopefully hanging in your matchup.
Well, no, DeMarcus Robinson had a hand injury that was bothering him and was listed as questionable to return at the end. So again, not someone we're overly relying on anyway, but just one injury to keep an eye out there ahead of next week's matchup in Buffalo. Otherwise, yeah, really nice game from Kyren Williams. I thought it was maybe the best he's looked all season, just in terms of how he was able to make the most out of his touches. I mean, just look at his last carry where he wound up getting 10 or 11 yards with a vicious stiff arm to pick up that extra yak. So got a touchdown, got again 113 total yards for the cause. However, Dwayne, I did see a pretty close touch count actually at halftime. Was there a bit more Blake Corum than usual?
Yeah, and that might have been the motivating factor for Kyren.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, Blake Corum got the second drive, and he got five touches in that drive. He ended up with 8 rushing attempts on the game, so 5 of them came in that one drive. But yes, he did register his highest snap share at 30%. 33% of the snaps and 30% of the team rushing attempts. So obviously, coincidingly, Kyren Williams had his lowest marks of the year, but still came through with 18.3 fantasy points because what you said, Ian, he did look really good today. So not going to read too much into it. I think it just reaffirms what we already knew. Blake Corum is the clear-cut running back 2 in this offense. Knock on wood, we don't want this to happen, but if something did happen to Kyren Williams, you would instantly have a guy we would be talking about potentially in the running back 1 conversation. Blake Corum remains out there on many of the waiver wires, like over at Yahoo League, not even rostered 70% right now. So this is a guy that's out there a ton.
All right, I got my list in front of me now. I'm not going to let you guys down again. Last week, under 45% owned on ESPN. Tyler Algier, Tajay Spears, Trey Benson, Roshan Johnson, Braylon Allen, Blake Corum, and Ray Davis. Those are sort of handcuffs where, again, one injury away from very much being in that top 12 conversation. At worst, right now, I would say right around that mid-tier RB2 line. So definitely make sure to keep an eye on those guys, particularly over this next week. There's 6 teams on bye, man. There's going to be some teams out there with a bunch of those players on the same roster. Got to make some tough cuts. And accordingly, these handcuffed running backs who, yes, aren't all that valuable right now, but are one injury away from being what the kids would call league winners. Otherwise, with the Saints, Derek Carr, Dwayne, we started him in a league where we had some questions about Brock Purdy and Jameis Winston and just, a lot of bad stuff going on. Eked out 16 fantasy points for us, though. $184 and a touchdown through the air. Could have had a second touchdown. Found Alvin Kamara. Unfortunately, the 12-yard score was nullified on an illegal man downfield penalty where it looked like the guard basically ran downfield and then sprinted back across the line, and they just still called it anyway. So, yeah, again, it just didn't cause the touchdown to happen, which I try to make a distinction when talking about these nullified penalties. But yeah, would have been a lot cooler if that counted. Regardless, Kamara found his way to 119 total yards, continuing to be a workhorse out there. And again, pretty much business as usual. Big injury, though, we need to talk about, though, Dwayne, is Taysom Hill. I thought it was a hit to the head and a concussion.
Yeah.
Actually got ruled out, though, with a knee injury.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did have a guy going low as he was running into his own player up high. So, okay. Yeah, so guess it was a knee or something.
Maybe both. I don't know, but he went off with the knee, man. And accordingly, I hope he plays, man. All right. Like Taysom Hill, we want all these guys to play and everything. But even if he's out, is there anyone on this team, Juwan Johnson, maybe that all of a sudden you're moving up the ranks? To me, it's just like, oh, Alvin Kamara's ceiling is that much higher.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara is definitely like the guy. And to your point, it is very hard to get behind. But we have seen Juwan Johnson here recently with a higher route participation. Today he came in at 80% with the Taysom Hill injury. So it's still going to be a desperation play. But with so many tight ends on bye this next weekend, just looking at it now, you're not going to have Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely. You're not using anybody from Denver. You probably weren't starting Dalton Schultz. You're not using any from the Colts, but maybe you had Hunter Henry or Zach Ertz or Mark Andrews. Like, you could be in need of a tight end. If I had to pick one from this team, Ian, it would be Juwan Johnson. But to your point, still pretty tough to trust. He had 7 targets today. That's probably a season high. I don't have his game log in front of me. That's probably a season high for Juwan Johnson. He had a 21% target share. So I would say, look, yeah, not a guy you're rushing to put into your lineup. But if I had to choose something that was going to come out of this for the Saints, it would be Juwan Johnson.
Good call, Dwayne. That was indeed a season high and could have been a bigger game with the box score. Caught 5 of them for 36 yards, but he actually had a target down the sideline where it went just off his fingertips. And you could see with the slow-mo, man, corner definitely got there a tick early. Alas, no DPI penalty there. So only other final note would be, yes, we did get the return of Jamal Williams, but 0 carries and just 1 catch. Kendra Miller is due back soon, Dwayne. Maybe that's the sort of skank league pickup we should be looking at, because there was even a report saying, like, people were unclear why he even got put on IR. Like, that's how much Dennis Allen actually hated this guy.
Yeah, I like that. I like that call for the playoff run. If you're playing in a deep league where, you're sitting here listening to this, you're like, Blake Corum, he's not available anywhere. Well, Kendra Miller's been, you and I playing a ton of skank leagues together, Ian, like 20 of them. Yeah. And Kendra Miller's available in most of them.
So we'll get on those waiver wires this week. Certainly. Last note, though, gotta give some flowers, man. Marquez Valdes-Scantling won't stop scoring touchdowns. Got another one today. Now has 4 in his last 3 games. Even hit the shrug himself after getting there. So, no, Dwayne, we don't really trust him, do we?
9% target share, be my guest. He led the team in route participation, 82%. So, I mean, he's their wide receiver 1 right now, like in playing time. So, I mean, honestly, I think you could argue Derek Carr's playing the best he's played this year and is with no one. I mean, seriously, 186 yards with this receiving crew. That's pretty. I mean, in the 2 games before that, like, he was, obviously did way better than that. Like, yeah. I'm not saying Derek Carr suddenly this great quarterback, but like playing well for not having any weapons, man. No Chris Olave, no Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill getting knocked out of this game. I mean, like, this is the walking wounded here.
And I know Saints fans are going to be quick to point out that, you could maybe blame Derek Carr for getting Olave and some of these players knocked out of games. But true. Yeah, either way, without them playing some good football. So they get the Giants next week, then the Commanders. Potential hilarious circumstances because we got a revenge game for MVS against the Packers in week 16 and then the Derek Carr game against the Raiders in week 17. So again, I would really try to avoid trying to start these guys in meaningful fantasy games, but certainly going out there and making some plays lately will continue. Probably not, but you could imagine. So Dwain, 2 more goodness recaps to get to, but first I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at DraftKings. The days of waiting in lines at midnight to get the best Black Friday deal are over. Now, all you got to do is check out our partners over at DraftKings Sportsbook, who have touchdowns on sale all weekend long and presumably into next week. Now, that is something to get excited about. And did you think that was it? Well, right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using my promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. That's right. Check out the DraftKings Sportsbook app all weekend long to stay up to date on all the touchdown offers available. And don't forget to stay in on the action and use your $150 in bonus bets on DraftKings same game parlays for a shot at an even bigger payout. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The Buccaneers took down the Panthers 26-23 in an overtime affair that kept us from starting the show a couple extra minutes late. But hey, kudos to Bryce Young and the Panthers for covering as 6.5-point favorites, helping cash that over at 46, and honestly being an ill-timed Chuba Hubbard late game fumble away from taking home the W. But we will start with the Buccaneers, who got arguably, probably, I would say definitely the worst performance of the season from Baker Mayfield. 235 yards and a touchdown, but not 1, but 2 interceptions, both of which were very much his fault. Also took 4 sacks out there for the cause. So he did get injured at one point, came right back in when you were wondering where he was, and immediately threw another interception. So maybe that's why he and Will Howard decided to play so bad over these past 2 days. But yeah, Dwain, not great, but even in a game that wasn't great. Still got his guy Mike Evans, 8 catches for 118 yards and a touchdown. Had a sweet one-handed touchdown catch, and I believe the second drive of the game. So good stuff there. However, we have now seen back-to-back weeks with Mike Evans in the picture of Cade Otton falling off. So I know we were hopeful that it was just going to be Otton still almost sticking in that same sort of Chris Godwin role. Have you seen enough over these last 2 weeks to maybe downgrading him here ahead of Week 14's matchup against the Raiders?
Man, my gut still says he's going to be fine. I mean, he had 21% target share today. He had 7 targets. He just didn't score. He just scored 6 fantasy points. Like some of his best games came on targets of like 7 or 8 targets. Yeah. So I don't want to overreact to the Otton thing. Obviously, we've got other guys, right in that range. I think the big takeaway is he was really at one point like knocking on the door of, does he just belong in the top tier with Bowers and Kelsey, and McBride? And the answer is no, like he doesn't. But I still think that the most likely outcome for him the rest of the way is that he is in that next group. I think that Cade Otton will still be in that next group because Baker Mayfield, has really been good. This was a dud performance for Baker, to your point, but still, he still managed 235 yards passing and still got a passing touchdown. So, I mean, like that being a dud game is better than, some of the 150-yard performances we've seen from guys like Aaron Rodgers. So I think Baker alone like keeps it alive. And there's just not another person here, Ian, looking at it that scares me that suddenly they're going to become this high-end target earners. Today it was Sterling Shepard with a 21% target share. He had 8.2 fantasy points. Obviously, Evans had the big day at 35%. I think it still most likely ends up being balanced around Evans and Otton the rest of the way. But yeah, a little bit of a downgrade, not knocking on that high-end tight end 1 door anymore, but still I think a mid-range tight end 1. Like if you wanted to put him at the bottom of that tier, I couldn't argue with it really either. But again, so much of what we do in fantasy is like, we're just chasing the outcomes too much. Like I don't think Otton's role has really changed that much. I think he's just had a couple of bad games, but because it's with Evans back in the lineup, like that's what our brains want to jump to. It's, right. It's because of Evans. I think there's still plenty of targets to go around here because like nobody else is doing it. Like Jalen McMillan's not turning into like this high-end great player. Really, you can argue the next best thing are the running backs, and they like dumping the ball off to them, but they weren't super involved today. It just so happens that those targets, they went to Sterling Shepard instead of getting a few extra ones to Cade Otton today.
Otherwise, we would be talking about those running backs who did not get it done receiving, to your point, for the most part. But my God, did Bucky come to play on the ground? 25 carries, 152 yards, and a touchdown. So a mix of Bucky being Bucky, one of the shiftiest, most elusive running backs in the NFL this year. I believe going into the game, only Kenneth Walker actually had a higher rate of forcing missed tackles on carries. Also, Dwain, particularly on the touchdown, did see a little bit of them, facing the Carolina Panthers defense and getting holes that you aren't going to find against many other professional units. But all those fantasy points count the same regardless. And again, 185 total yards in this one, and really a touch count, man, that no longer seemed like it was 1A, 1B with Rachaad White. I might have to eat my words, Dwain. I did not see Bucky Irving completely taking over this backfield as long as Rachaad White stayed healthy, but lo and behold, kind of looks like he did just that.
What's interesting is their snaps were almost the same still. 53% for Irving and 52% for Rachaad White, but 66% of the rushing attempts to Bucky Irving, only 29% to Rachaad White. Rachaad White led the way in the route participation department, 56% versus 33% for Bucky Irving. So essentially what made this happen is you had a trailing game script that left plenty of snaps out there for Rachaad White, but typically when he was on the field, it wasn't on a rundown. It was on a passing down. So Bucky was dominating those rundowns. Rachaad White more dominating the passing downs. I think we could live with that. And because Bucky, the thing is, man, they get him involved on those early downs in the passing game. Yeah, he wasn't huge today, but he had 3 catches for 33 yards. I mean, he had 6.3 fantasy points in a PPR on top. And that was big. That helped him get to that 27.5. You take those. I know it's PPR scoring, Ian, so I don't want to trigger you. You take those away. I mean, it's still a good performance. It's 20 fantasy points versus, almost 28. So still positive for Bucky. But yeah, it looks like he's taken over as the primary early down back. We have Rachaad White getting some of that passing down work, but such a great schedule down the stretch besides one tough matchup against the Chargers. Man, you have to be feeling great about Bucky Irving right now. We upgraded him last week to low end running back 2, and we said he had running back 1 upside pretty much every week. He showed that off today. I mean, he'll be upgrading again. I mean, he's one of these guys, Ian, it's starting to become like Alvin Kamara's rookie year. I know a different archetype player, like as far as not getting all that passing down work, but he's just so good. Maybe the better comp would be going back to Achane last year.
Yeah.
Even though you knew there were going to be games where he was going to share the workload, it's like, man, he's too good to keep off the field. When he gets his touches, he's great. And when he has a big workload like today, 25 carries, man, you're going to get some massive fantasy points.
We get the Raiders next week at home. He's going to be a top 12, if not top 8 running back with all teams on bye. One tough matchup remains at the Chargers in week 15. But after that, man, Cowboys and the Panthers to close out the fantasy football playoffs. Get your popcorn ready for those. I think that does it there for the Buccaneers. Over with the Panthers. Now, another really nice game from Bryce Young, man. And I know the Buccaneers defense isn't exactly a juggernaut, but again, watch the film out there. Had a lot of big time throws. So 26 of 46 passing, not the cleanest game, from a completion percentage perspective, but still found his way at 298 yards and a touchdown. A lot of which, Dwain, did go to Adam Thielen. Man, 8 catches on 10 targets for 99 yards and 1 touchdown. I don't know how he didn't have 2, man. He had the ball.
Dude, how did that? I mean, the ref missed it. And then replay, are you kidding me? It looked like he had a knee down, an elbow down. I don't know what a catch is. I've not known.
Yes, they want to say maybe he didn't have full control because we didn't have the other sideline shot, which is another issue. I'm with you, man. I thought he caught it. Dez caught it. Adam Thielen caught it. That's what I'm trying to say, man. So, and kind of made up for it at the end. Had that game tying. Should have been the game-winning touchdown at the end of the fourth quarter. Unfortunately, Buccaneers came back and got that field goal. Still got that nice gritty, and then just a ridiculous one-handed snag, in OT to what should have been, again, set out the Panthers for the win. Unfortunately, Chuba Hubbard had the late-game fumble to really end things. So just on Thielen, though, Dwain, we saw him do this last year when he was healthy early, just legit working as a wide receiver 1 before the offense kind of fell off and before maybe we just saw him tired out a bit down the stretch. But, man, he's healthy now and looking good. The problem is next week we get the Philadelphia Eagles, which is not a spot where we're going to want to be messing with anyone there. But I'm pulling up the Panthers schedule now. After the Eagles, Cowboys, Cardinals, and Buccaneers. Do you think Adam Thielen can give us even wide receiver 2 production down that stretch?
Yeah, I mean, I think he could. He's proven that he can. And I just want to say with Bryce Young, like today, the completion percentage, 57%. But man, he was pushing the ball down the field, 9.6 yards, air yards, or so average depth of target. So Yeah, I mean, I like what we're seeing from Bryce Young. I think this is the best game I've seen from him, and just confidence, man. Stepping up in the pocket, pushing the ball down the field, seeing the field, which I know a lot of people want to joke about that. Like, it can be tough whenever you're a shorter guy like that, but maybe he's learning how to work through some of that, like a guy like Drew Brees had to do. So we'll see where it ultimately ends up. But I do think this was the best start that I have personally seen from Bryce Young, even though the completion percent was a little bit low. And just watching it, man, he looks more confident than I've ever seen. Look, Ian, all we can do is go with the trend, right? Yeah. 9.7 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, 16.5, 23.6. He's obviously scoring like 40 fantasy points next week. Like, that's what's happening. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, guys. But yeah, Adam Thielen, 24% target share today. He did lead the team, 78% route participation. That was a bump up from where he was last week in that first game back from injury. So 23.9 fantasy points. And I mean, Thielen, I know we're going to want to say just because he's old, he can't do it. He's playing a position that's friendly, playing inside in the slot, gets a lot of this stuff underneath the coverage. Had a decent ADOT today, though, 11.3. So part of that stuff getting pushed down the field. Even Thielen's touchdown, was a decent, it wasn't just like some little 3-yard drag route. Like, Thielen was a little bit more involved down the field. So yeah, I do think that there's a chance that he's a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way. To your point, next week is pretty tough. And they are involving all these other guys. Like David Moore had a 22% target share today. Tommy Trembles had a 20% target share. Yeah, 96% routes today for Tommy Tremble with Jatavian Sanders out in this one. And Xavier Legette also had a 20% target share. So pretty much spread across 4 guys here. So I don't want to get crazy with Adam Thielen, but I could see a wide receiver 3 the rest of the way. Obviously, Bryce Young's got to keep doing his thing.
Just a few other notes on all those guys you just mentioned. Starting with Bryce. Yeah, man, look good. Actually moving around too. The touchdown run, which will help out in fantasy 8 days of the week, looked pretty spry there. And even, that deep ball, Tommy Trembles got kind of open on a busted coverage, but man, to get out of the pocket and still make that throw on the run, plays again that he just was not making for the majority of his rookie year, and especially before getting benched this season as well. So Legette, four catches on 8 targets for 53 yards, had a better ball 20-yard touchdown opportunity, and also had a real nice comeback route that I'm not sure what the exact name for it is, but it's like the stutter, go, and then they break it off there at the end. So good route running chops from a guy who we know is more of a raw kind of athlete first profile, starting to come into his own is all you can ask, towards the end of year 1. Mentioned David Moore, 2 bad drops, arguable better ball score at the late, kind of sprung open there at the end, so not going to be too hard on Bryce with that one. But otherwise, man, yeah, good stuff from a passing game that's been this way more weeks than not. I'm not saying Bryce has been completely lights out since he's gotten back in, man, but I had the numbers in an article last week, and he's at a minimum been in about an average quarterback league wide. And really, man, that Chiefs game last week was fantastic. I thought the Saints game a couple weeks before, he made some real good throws. We're seeing flashes, and accordingly, Ian Rappaport said before the game, the Panthers are not expecting to draft a quarterback early next year. So maybe, just maybe, all those Bryce Young dynasty bags, everyone, not completely in flames yet. Got to talk about the backfield, though, Dwain, because Chuba Hubbard, yeah, it sucked losing that fumble at the end, and that was, I believe, his 3rd lost fumble of the season. But bigger issue might have been the emergence of Jonathan Brooks in his 2nd career game.
Yeah, so 79% snap share today for Chuba Hubbard, which was in ranges where he's been, but he's had some like 89, 88%, really high marks over the last couple of games. But this was the lowest rush share for Chuba Hubbard since week 2. He had a 56% rush share in week 2. Today he had a 57%. Between then and there, like, he's typically been 70% or higher in almost every single game. So 57%, not the end of the world, but on a team like the Panthers, Ian, where we're not necessarily in love with the offense, that is a downgrade for Chuba Hubbard. We have to move him down the ranks moving forward. And to your point, it was Jonathan Brooks, the guy that they spent the 2nd round pick on. Only 2.3 fantasy points today for Chuba Hubbard. Just an absolute vomit game. 7.1 from Jonathan Brooks, who had a 21% snap share. Not great, but got 29% of the rushing attempts. So we could see this backfield start to divvy up a little bit more between these two. I wouldn't be surprised to see it more like a 60-30 and then Bryce Young getting like the other 10%. I think that that's reasonable. And again, that doesn't mean Chuba Hubbard's like just a complete lost cause in fantasy, but it definitely hurts, man, because it's just an offense where I just think getting all the volume is what kind of insulates you from these really big duds. But if you have to start sharing, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. Jonathan Brooks himself, still just really a stash play, but it is a step in the right direction.
He looked good, man. He had at least 2 very nice runs where he was breaking tackles, looking fast, looking
He's a baller,
physical,
man.
and absolutely. And hey, but guess what? The Panthers did want to just go ahead and drag it on a little bit, ease him back in the rotation. That would make sense. And accordingly, could see that snap share again continuing to shrink the rest of the way. Probably, unfortunately, rendering both guys as people we can't exactly trust in fantasy land, but at least, again, the future looking brighter for the Panthers faithful than it did a few short weeks ago. So I think that one about does it in this one, which takes us to our final game to break down, which was the Philadelphia Eagles beating down the Baltimore Ravens 24-19 in a game that, I mean, wasn't that close because Lamar Jackson went screaming down the field, in the last minute or so, down 2 scores already to score a last touchdown. But you know what, Dwayne, when you got an alleged GOAT kicker also directly being responsible for 7 missed points out there, 19 for 27 field goals for those counting at home. Yeah, man, it does, like, all jokes aside. Okay, this is a little bit of a joke too, but it's crazy to me, Dwayne, how we see like running backs, like hardened baller, just freak athletes. They fumble once and they get benched. And you can have a kicker literally miss kick after kick, and they get more undying loyalty from the coaching staff than any other position out there. So maybe they just don't want to deal with finding another one, but just ridiculous for all these reject soccer players who get the benefit of the doubt in a real sport. So that is annoying. But you know what's not annoying is this Eagles rushing attack. Saquon, buck 107 yards, I should just say, on the ground, had a 25-yard sprint. He looks more explosive than ever, Dwayne. That's the wild part to me. Like, okay, coming into this year, yes, of course, behind the offensive line, we knew Saquon was good, but I swear to God, he looks more explosive than he did even going back to his days almost at Penn State. So maybe it's recency bias, but just, man, this potential to hit the home run any given snap. Maybe it just was him playing through some unfortunate early season injuries that made us forget.
I think it's also the scheme. Like, dude, when they get him going on these power concepts, dude, he's a beast. When they do these little quick toss plays, they get a guard pulling out in front of him. Those sort of plays, man, are the ones where he's just like, you could just feel a home run coming in absolute any moment. I think a lot of the inside zone stuff, those sort of things, like he kind of looks, he's better, but he still looks a little like what he used to. It's whenever they get him, with a little bit of a head of steam going. And man, he hits that hole. And once he gets to that next defender, not only like can he just beat him with his speed, like take away the angle, like he can put his shoulder down and run over you, or he could just juke the guy out of their shoes, or do a backwards hurdle. Like, it doesn't really matter. He just has everything at his disposal at every single level of the defense. But man, I get the most excited when I see them using these power run concepts with Saquon. He doesn't get to do it all game, but you'll see it typically in the second half. They'll start giving him those, and man, you can just see it. It's about to pop. He obviously had a nice run today, and look, that's a tough run defense you just did that against. Like, the Eagles actually went about this game the opposite way of like the way I thought they would have, which would have been a secondary that struggles. Let's come out and feed AJ Brown. Let's do it through the air. Right. A really good defense against the run game. Maybe it's a little bit less for Barkley, but man, they just remain committed to the run. We only saw 21 dropbacks today for Jalen Hurts in a game where they were playing the freaking Ravens.
Eagles versus the Lions on a neutral field. Who would you pick?
Give me the Lions.
Yeah. It's getting close.
It's close, man. It's close. It's close. But I need to see the Eagles be able to do it when someone does shut down their run game. And the Lions have a really good run defense as well. And they would come out with the number one focus will be to stop Saquon. Now, can they? They may not be able to. They still may not be able to. Saquon has answered the call like pretty much every week, right? Regardless of who the run defense has been. So not saying Saquon wouldn't win that matchup, but I would like to see a crisp passing game, like start to finish. I'm not saying Jalen hadn't been playing good. I just want to see it like come to fruition that if they need to win a game like that, can they? We haven't necessarily seen that yet. So we know it's potentially there. Like, it's freaking AJ Brown, man. Yeah. Like, I think him and Jalen Hurts could do it. I just want to see it.
A little bit of a disappointing effort from AJB and company against the defense that, again, we've seen plenty of teams have success with through the air. But because of how surprisingly well the Eagles were able to run the ball, they got
21 routes, man.
Yeah. That's it. So just didn't need to really push the effort. So caught 5 of 6 targets for 66 yards. Hurts had a buck 18 on 11 of 19 passing. So not, incredible stuff out here. But yeah, certainly would expect some hopefully bigger days next week against the Panthers. But then again, Dwayne, like, could AJ Brown go for 200 yards against the Panthers? And I wouldn't be surprised. Yes. Could he also have 4 targets in a runaway victory where they don't need to throw the ball? I also wouldn't be surprised, man. That's the only annoying part.
He's more boom bust than what we want to call him because of how good of a player he is. You never want to, like, if you call AJ Brown a boom bust player on Twitter, you're going to get freaking murdered. But you're not talking about his talent. We clearly know he's a great player, but it's the way these game scripts go that you just mentioned. I mean, look, you can have a 35% target share, but if your team's only dropping back to pass 20 times, it's still going to be a rough day unless you hit like two really big plays. I mean, most guys, we look at them and we're like, oh man, this guy, he's got a 17% target share. He sucks. And you're like, well, he had 5 targets. That's the same thing that AJ Brown had, even though he had a 35% target share. So, I mean, sometimes you have to look at the raw numbers, and that's the challenge for AJ Brown. Just not enough passing attempts consistently on a week-to-week basis, which I know, I'll shut up. You were already saying that with far less words. So good job, Hartitz.
You're good. And last thing, I guess, would just be no Devonta Smith in this one, which makes this even kind of wilder to wrap your head around, just the lack of overall volume. He was seemingly pretty close, though, so I would anticipate him returning from that hamstring injury next week against the Panthers. But hey, man, in our ranks just kind of throughout the week, thinking that he might have a chance to go out there and play, still wasn't more than a wide receiver 4. So might be cracking our top 36. So again, with all those teams on bye and everything, obviously an amazing real life player, but again, only so much you can do with 4 or 5 targets to your name. Luckily, Dallas Goedert did prove that you can have a good game with that low target total. Caught 3 of his 4 opportunities for 35 yards and a touchdown. Showing off some nice yak. Always good to have a healthy Dallas Goedert in the fold. Otherwise, when we do have the Ravens, Lamar, again, helping his cause there at the end. 79 yards on the ground, including just a ridiculous 39-yard jaunt through the heart of the Eagles defense there. Found Isaiah Likely for a late-game touchdown. Had Mark Andrews before getting his tight ends involved. But, yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, like the 3 missed kicks were a huge factor in this game, as were 2 really ill-timed drops, man. He found Mark Andrews for what could have been a 17-yard touchdown. I think more likely he gets tackled at the 1-yard line, but they had to settle for a field goal that Tucker surprisingly actually made. And then there was also a drop to Nelson Aguilar. Go ahead and insert that GIF meme from 5 years ago down the sideline that would have again positioned the Ravens inside the 5-yard line. So I mean, the fact that Lamar again was 3 kicks and a couple drops away from really, I mean, making this arguably a Ravens win, or at least making it a lot closer down the stretch, man, I wouldn't be concerned about the performance. Just wild, man, in a game where Rashad Bateman got ruled out with a knee injury. 0 snaps from Deontay Johnson. That's real.
Oh, man, I haven't even got to it yet. I was sitting here looking at Lamar. I'm just about to say, like, man, he has only failed to score 20 fantasy points twice.
King.
Sorry, 3 times. 3 times.
Shit.
He's got a 16-point game out there. He had a 19-point game against the Commanders, and then he had 15-pointer against the Steelers. I mean, it's just insane. 25, 26, 24, 33, 34, 24, 24, 33, 23, 20, 25 today. Dude, it's insane. Yeah. Lamar Jackson is an absolute beast. He's thrown 29 passing touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Sometimes I get so caught up in like a lot of the utilization is focused on the other positions. Like I obviously write and read about the quarterbacks and look at all their stuff every week, but I don't always like look at it like and just see the whole game log laid out like that. And I'm like, man, that's incredible. And where he's at for the season with 29 passing touchdowns, Lamar, man, league MVP, man, he looks amazing. But yeah, so sorry, switching now that I get over just drooling all over myself looking at Lamar Jackson, wondering why I didn't draft him more. Yeah, so we did not see Deontay Johnson out here for one single play today, which is pretty wild. You got Nelson Aguilar, got to get him out there for 57% route participation. God knows you got to do that. Yeah. And that's even with Rashad Bateman getting hurt, which I think you already said, 41%. So yeah, it was Tylan Wallace bumping up to a 61% route participation. So when they knew they were needing to be in a pass mode to come back to try to win a game, they evidently did not trust Deontay Johnson to be on the field.
One of these things, Dwayne, where happens with the Steelers. Okay. Seems like this organization is just, has CTE dripping in the wide receiver room at this point. I don't know what's going on there. But then the Panthers, you have multiple 100-yard games. They give them away for a bag of chips. And now the Ravens can't even find a snap to give the guy. Seeing Deontay Johnson in too many of these, variables, Dwayne, all of a sudden think it has nothing to do with it. So, yeah.
Doesn't mean he can't ball, but, man, you got to have it. You got to be a good teammate and do all the other things, too. And it matters more for certain organizations than others, and I think it matters a lot to the Ravens.
And, they're a pretty good organization, so they should probably keep on doing what they're doing. But yeah, so for the time being, and, seems like this time is going to be a while, Zay Flowers continues to be the wide receiver one. Just wish he had more targets, but, makes the most of them. Caught 3 of 7 for 74 yards today. Otherwise, really just was these tight ends. Again, Mark Andrews, 67 yards and a touchdown. Just looking great, man. Had 2 or 3 just contested catches, looking fully healthy. But Isaiah Likely pretty good in his own right. Had that aforementioned later game touchdown, and, man, got missed on a rare, Lamar overthrow on what probably would have been another 40-yard gain at another point. So have we seen Andrews start to maybe, Dwayne, get back up that 80% route rate, or still just kind of bumping around? Damn.
Just bumping around. 61% route participation, 55 for Likely. It's just this is the reality of the season for the Ravens. It could change at some point, but yeah, I think they're happy doing it this way. I think they like both of the players. I think they, the offense has not been a problem, right? The defense has really been the problem. And to your point, Justin Tucker and the defense has been the problem. The offense continues doing what it needs to do. So yeah, I don't see this changing. The good news is, like, Mark Andrews is still, even though like he's not at that 80%, like he's at a point now where I don't worry about, he's in my top 10 ranks every week.
Yeah.
Like, even though he's not getting all the playing time, just because, like, man, I'll take 60% in the Ravens offense is worth like what, 99%, for the Panthers, and some of these other teams. So some of this, you just kind of got to look at the quality of the team they play for. I know we would rather have more because, Mark Andrews might be a top 3 tight end if he was in a full-time role right now. With how good this is the best offense he's probably ever played in, from a passing yards per game. It is. There's no doubt. This is the best passing yards per game offense that Mark Andrews has ever played in. So he would probably be like a top 3 tight end with a full-time role. He doesn't have it, but he is a player that you can start in fantasy. And to your point, he looks great.
He's basically had 2 duds in his last 9, man. Dude. We had that horrific 2-game stretch without a single catch, and he's been killing it otherwise. Catching a touchdown almost every game. So good stuff on Andrews. Hopefully he didn't give up too early on him. And otherwise, man, yeah, Ravens second-ranked scoring offense in the NFL coming into this one. Still good and, have a lot of good things going on, just not with their special teams unit. So only other notes, Dwayne, we did get some news coming in as we were doing the show. Rap Sheet does believe Taysom Hill, who was carted off today, is feared to have suffered a season-ending knee injury. It's December. Maybe that means a 4-week, but you do hear season ending, and it could fear to be a ligament involved. So we'll see what the MRI says. And also Christian McCaffrey, in fact, won't return Sunday. They said he might have suffered a PCL sprain on the play before he basically went down. So kind of got hit, and then he just kind of knew his leg wasn't right, so it went down. So I don't think it was a horrific non-contact injury that happened right at that moment, because I did see the replay. But regardless, not returning Sunday, and just a cherry on top of a horrific season for anyone that drafted CMC. So that sucks, Dwayne. That sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to pull up the game log. I think, I've been kind of glancing over at the screen like as we've been recording, and I feel like it's been mostly Jordan Mason as the guy getting the carries. So that's what I would anticipate. Well, Jordan Mason has, it is 10 carries for Jordan Mason, only 1 for Isaac Guerrero, and 76 yards for Mason. Look, we already saw Mason operate as a running back 1 earlier this year. So it wouldn't surprise me if we don't see CMC for a while, that, Mason's more of, I don't think we'd immediately put him in the running back 1 conversation. Well, we might, with all the bye weeks that we have, but at least like a mid-range running back 2. He calmed down a little bit after the super hot start, but man, still a player that you can use in fantasy for the stretch run if you've got him on the roster.
He's a little more touchdown dependent RB2 type, just because the offense isn't quite as good and they don't throw him the football. But Bears, Rams, Dolphins, Lions down the stretch. Those are, even the Rams defense isn't that bad against the run, or at least they're not as bad, relative to the pass. So not layups, but hey, we're getting 15, more likely 20 plus designed, carries from Kyle Shanahan. Going to be tough to move anybody too far down the ranks there. So I think that is going to do it for us, Dwayne. Over 2 hours and week 13. My goodness, is it a great day to be great. So we will continue to watch the film, get better, and we invite you guys to do the same and check out our work over at Fantasy FantasyLife.com. I'll be back tomorrow morning with the great Chris Allen and Paul Charchian overreacting, underreacting to some of the storyline. Then it's your boy Dwain and I back in the saddle on Tuesday, going over the utilization and sheesh goodness. Dwain, myself, and Chris Allen talking about the biggest questions ahead of week 14 on Wednesday. Myself, Dwain, and Matthew Friedman on Thursday going through our rankings, risers, follows, and the 100% guaranteed to work out sicko starts. And then Dwain and I again on Friday going over the injury goodness. So appreciate you guys tuning in for all that. And otherwise, just have, a great rest of your week. For Dwain, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in.